Good morning, everyone. Welcome, 8 o'clock in the morning. Thank you for arriving a little bit earlier than we normally do, 90 minutes earlier, actually. So if you actually stepped out onto your front or your back porch, you would have woken up quite quickly this morning. That wind is very chilly. So I'm going to open up the April 11th Community Living Standing Committee. Welcome, and also I'll call it to order. Attendance, we have Councillor Bermansky, Councillor Hughes, Councillor Killick is joining us in person, and myself. We're still waiting for the mayor. I'm not sure if she's coming in or not. Also, we're joined here by Ruby Olson. And do we have any, I don't see anybody else on the screen. I think we were going to have Ann Ramsden come in as well. And I see that you're there. Sorry, I'm trying to look at about 3 different screens here. So
I see Ann in the, I see her, I don't see her face, but her name is here. So she's here virtually.
Okay. Good morning, Ann. Thank you for coming into the meeting. I see, Ann, on our agenda, it has you as under appointments. Are you going to wait until the specific item on the agenda, or would you want to speak at the beginning?
No, I'll wait. I'm just here to answer any questions that you may have that
okay.
Voice.
No, I appreciate that. Has everybody looked at the agenda for this morning? Any concerns? All right, I'm going to adopt the April 11th, 2022 Community Living Standing Committee meeting agenda as presented. We have a consent agenda this time around. When we were in agenda committee, we thought to move things along because, as everybody knows, we're quite squished for time. We agreed that we could actually move 6.1, 7.1, 7.2 on the consent agenda. And as I don't have any information in front of me that anyone wished any of those items to be pulled, can I get a member of the committee to make a recommendation that for the consent agenda, please? Councillor Hughes, go ahead.
All of a sudden my screen went over the wrong side. Okay, that the recommendations in the following agenda reports are pre-approved. 6.1 Community Living Standing Committee minutes of February 14th, 2022. 7.1 Advisory Committee meeting minutes, committee minutes and agenda items, and 7.2 request for standing committee motion from Environmental Advisory Committee.
Thank you. All in favor? Yes, it's unanimous. Thank you very much. Moving on into, that worked out well. I think we should do a consent agenda more often. I like that. Moving on into advisory committee business. We're moving into the Seniors Advisory Committee annual report. And I have on my agenda presented by Barbara Hahn, our past chair of our Seniors Advisory Committee, Ruby Olson, past vice chair, Seniors Advisory, and Dowie Vanderwall, vice chair, Seniors Advisory Committee. Is there a presentation by staff first, or is it just going to move on right into the committee presentation?
Right into committee.
Right in. All right.
Yes.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us. I always look forward to this. It's nice seeing everybody, and you guys are nice and warm, I trust, because it is chilly out there. Who's presenting this morning?
I'd like to speak first. My name is Dowie Vanderwall.
Please go right ahead, sir.
I'm the vice chair of the Seniors Advisory Committee. I'm here in place of Randy Black, who is the chairman. And I can tell you, knowing Randy, that he would really like to be here. 8 o'clock Monday morning notwithstanding. But Ruby Olson, last year's vice chair of the committee, and Barbara Hahn, last year's chair of the committee, have graciously offered to make the presentation for the Seniors Advisory Committee annual report. And so I'll turn the floor over to them in order for them to make that report.
Thank you very much. You're on mute, Ruby.
My apologies. Hi, good morning, everyone. I'm Barb Hahn, and I'm the past chair of the Seniors Advisory Committee. Ruby and I are going to be presenting our 2021 annual report this morning. So first of all, I wanted to say that that the Seniors Advisory Committee welcomed 4 new members into the committee last year. And we thought we had a very successful year despite the ongoing pandemic. We wanted to summarize the things that we had done last year based on our bylaw. So first of all, to provide input on city initiatives, what we did is for the St. Albert traffic bylaw, what we did is in order to prepare for the public hearing, we reviewed and proposed the proposed traffic bylaw changes and concerns raised by our committee at a focus group meeting that was held in 2020. And based on all of the information that we reviewed, we decided that there was no further action that we needed to take by our committee. The second thing was the municipal development plan. So in 2020, our committee had done an awful lot of work on the MDP. We reviewed the MDP from a seniors perspective, and we provided feedback to the Flourish Committee for their consideration. And in light of all of this work, it was decided that there was no further action needed to be taken by our committee for the MDP public hearing. The Riverbank landing development. So what we did there is we prepared for the public hearing by reviewing the latest renderings and information on the proposed development in the Oakmont neighborhood. It was decided again that no further action needed to be taken by the committee, but there was a couple of us on the committee that from our own personal perspectives actually provided information at the public hearing. The city's financial outlook. Committee members met with city staff to discuss the city's financial outlook and brainstorm ideas for revenue generation. The 10-year green environment strategy. I personally met and participated in a brainstorming open house and provided ideas and feedback to the city on this environmental initiative. The accessibility improvements at the Fountain Park Recreation Center. I was asked to write a letter in support of the city's grant application for accessibility improvements at Fountain Park. And for the 2022 city budget and service levels, I met with other cities, with city staff and other chairs of some of the other city committees to discuss the 2022 budget and impacts to service levels. I'm now going to have Ruby Olson continue on with our presentation.
So the next thing is we were asked to provide recommendations for council's consideration on issues that would support the well-being of seniors. So the first thing was Seniors Week declaration. The committee, in partnership with the St. Albert Seniors Association, made a written request to the city to declare June 7th to 13th, 2021 as Seniors Week in St. Albert. We were pleased that the mayor made this proclamation, inviting all residents to join in Seniors Week celebrations to recognize the valuable contributions of seniors. The second thing was World Elder Abuse Awareness Day declaration. After learning of the rising issue of elder abuse in the community, the committee, in partnership with the Stop Abuse in Families, SAFE, and the St. Albert Seniors Association, made a written request to the city to declare June 15th as World Elder Abuse Awareness Day in St. Albert. We were pleased that the mayor made this proclamation, asking residents to learn the signs of elder abuse so seniors can remain safe in our community. The third thing was proposed north to south transit route. continuing from 2020 due to a motion put forth from the joint meeting between the Youth Advisory Committee and the Seniors Advisory Committee. Members reviewed and discussed the pros and cons of a direct north to south transit route, compared it to existing transit routes. After meeting with Will Stebler from St. Albert Transit, the committee agreed that the cost of the proposed transit route is too expensive and does not provide the taxpayer or transit riders with much additional value. The Seniors Advisory Committee concluded that it would no longer support this initiative. And I will turn this back to Barb for the next section.
Okay, so furthering on, it's the relationships that we fostered during the year. So the first one was that we met with the Youth Advisory Committee again in 2021, and we discussed many topics of mutual interest to both demographics, such as affordable housing, the impact of COVID-19 on both youth and seniors, and how each committee stays in touch with their demographics. Members also discussed creating a subcommittee to facilitate a companionship and mentoring program for youth and seniors. The second thing we did was we attended the policing committee meeting. We discussed the impact of COVID-19, the isolation, scams, frauds, and elder abuse on seniors in St. Albert. The policing committee had sent us a number of questions, and what we did is we then followed up after this meeting with our written responses to their questions. The third relationship that we established was I met with the Senior Services Coordinator at the St. Albert Seniors Association regularly over the year to discuss seniors issues and the Seniors Week Declaration. Stop abuse in families. We had received a number of questions from the policing committee on elder abuse, and so what we did is we reached out to Stop Abuse in Families to help us answer those questions. And from that, we developed a relationship with the executive director and the elder abuse coordinator to discuss the elder abuse and the World Elder Abuse Awareness Day Declaration. I attended an interagency meeting for community-based organizations providing services to youth and seniors in St. Albert. We asked Marnie Lee, the St. Albert social housing specialist, to attend one of our meetings to give us an update on her new role with the city and discuss affordable housing for seniors, the rental assistance program, and to give us an update on the city's home sharing program. The last thing that we did is we had invited Zane Ham, an inclusive systems specialist with Women Building Futures, to attend one of our meetings and give us a brief introduction into equity, diversity, and inclusion. In order for us to respond to the policing committee, they had reached out to us to see if we would be in support of having an EDI committee formed in the city, and we just felt we didn't know enough about the topic to respond. So we actually had someone come in and talk to us first before we were able to make that response. So I'm going to turn it back now to Ruby. She's going to take us through one of our first priority that we had for 2021. Back to you, Ruby.
You're still on mute, Ruby. There you go.
Sorry about that. I thought I had unmuted. My apologies.
No
So
problem at all.
the first item under our priorities was the impact of COVID-19 on St. Albert seniors. So the current issues, we did a letter to council outlining our concerns with the province of Alberta's COVID-19 immunization plan, specifically the phased immunization program, immunization distribution, and public awareness and its potential impact on the seniors in our community. The committee requested our letter be shared with Alberta Health Services at an upcoming meeting with council and with St. Albert's 2 MLAs. Second, the Seniors Advisory Committee Chair and Vice Chair attended a stakeholder engagement session hosted by the COVID-19 Recovery Task Force to answer questions posed by the task force and provide feedback on their interim report. Then third thing, we did a letter to council thanking Public Works and Parks and Recreation for the great job in keeping the trail systems well maintained over the winter with extra wide snow clearing, which allowed for socially distanced activities. The fourth thing, committee members attended a virtual town hall by the Minister of Seniors and Housing to hear the latest information on COVID-19 and its impact on seniors and the government of Alberta's vaccination program. And the fifth, the committee members reviewed the results of the survey conducted by the St. Albert Seniors Association in the fall of 2020 regarding the impact of COVID-19 on seniors in St. Albert. And now we have post-COVID, which is really a fallacy because it's still with us and booming from what we understand by numbers now. Anyway, post-COVID, a letter to the COVID-19 Recovery Task Force with 7 suggestions for the way the city could memorialize those in the community who died from COVID-19, the majority of those being seniors, and to also honor healthcare and frontline essential workers for their courage and dedication during the pandemic. And in terms of future preparedness, we tackled a little bit of aging in place, staying in home for as long, in your own home for as long as possible. To be successful, you need to be informed and have a plan. The chair attended 3 aging in place seminars about building an aging in place support team, determining if your home is safe and accessible as you age, and the 20 modifications to make so you can age well in your home. Sessions were held online at the St. Albert Seniors Association and the St. Albert Public Library. With so many seniors living in St. Albert, the committee recommended the city consider establishing a Senior Connect program like the one in the city of Spruce Grove, which provides online training for residents and teaches them how to recognize and respond to seniors in need. The committee recommended the Policing Committee and the St. Albert RCMP consider implementing a wandering seniors program to educate caregivers about what to do when a loved one wanders, how to prevent it from happening, and the use of wearable devices to locate lost seniors. And the second thing we did was bridging the digital divide. 2 committee members reviewed several applications to determine if they are senior friendly after receiving the Stay Home Living app from council to review. Their findings will be provided in a future deliverable. And then I'll turn it back to Barb for the second part of our of this one.
So as I mentioned earlier, when we met with the Youth Advisory Committee earlier in the year, we had agreed to create a subcommittee to look at intergenerational programming opportunities for youth and seniors in St. Albert. I was not able to get the Youth Advisory Committee to work on this project. So we decided we would just venture on our own. And what we did is we looked at a number of things. And the first thing we did is we looked at what currently exists in the city. And so we contacted several organizations to see if they actually have any kind of programs that we could look at. And so we spoke to the Big Sisters, Big Brothers of St. Albert. We spoke to the St. Albert Public Library. We spoke to the City of St. Albert Community Services, the St. Albert Seniors Association, and Homeland Housing. And other than Big Sisters, Big Brothers, there's no other intergenerational programs that exist in St. Albert at this time. We then looked at intergenerational sporting activities. And So possible sporting activities that both seniors and youth could do together would be things like pickleball, golf, disc golf, possibly curling, and definitely we thought that skating at outdoor rinks and freezeways would be a definite activity that seniors and youth could do together. What we then looked at was intergenerational programs that exist in other communities, and looked at the Garden of Generations program that they have in Surrey, BC. We looked at the Linking Generations program that they have in Sherwood Park, and the Linkages Connecting Generations program that they have in Calgary. So the last thing we did is FCSS approached us, and I met with one of their representatives to discuss the creation of a pilot project, companionship and mentoring program to connect youths and seniors in the community. FCSS had been hearing at interagency meetings that they had attended, and from the mental wellness working table, that there are some isolated and lonely seniors in the community, and that many youths are also struggling. Parents were having a difficult time getting their teens to go leave the house, to go to school, to attend different activities. And so a lot of them were having anxiety issues. Perhaps the two demographics could help each other. In order to gauge interest in this type of program, we developed a brief survey, and in December, FCSS asked seniors and youth interested in participating in the pilot to respond. We had over a dozen residents complete the survey. In February of 2022, FCSS held an online focus group meeting to gather information and solicit ideas from the participants. And from that, the survey and the focus group, it was decided that we would go ahead and have some events to see if we could get people out in the community. And so the first event is actually being held this week on Thursday. It's going to be held in the evening at the St. Albert Public Library, and it's going to be a games night. And so I haven't heard whether it's still a go, but I hope to attend if it does, and we'll see if we can perhaps maybe get an intergenerational program started here in St. Albert. And that's it.
Good report.
There's one more thing I would.
Yeah, I was going to go ahead, Ruby.
There's one more thing I just wanted to add, and it's in our 13-page full annual report that we submitted. In April, myself and Barb attended a virtual session on creating age-friendly communities in Alberta that was presented by Core Alberta. And the communities of Innisfail, Lethbridge, and the city of Edmonton presented what they did to become an age-friendly community, and how your community can start working towards being an age-friendly community too. So one of the things that we captured out of that was the phrase, design for the young and you exclude the old. Design for the old and you include everyone. So those, what we learned in that session was really encouraging to see what those communities have done. And in the one case for sure, anything that comes before their city to develop, the first question they ask is this inclusive for seniors? Whether it's a traffic light or an intersection or where sidewalks are lowered or so on. So I just wanted to add that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Very thorough, very enjoyable. I read the report and just as listening to the presentation, I was very impressed with the amount of effort and work and commitment that this committee has shown for all of their work, not only within the committee, but also in the community. So thank you very much. I mean, busy. It sounds incredible. Any questions from committee members, Councillor Hughes or Councillor Killick? Councillor Killick, pardon me. I know you guys are the representatives on the seniors committee. Any comments? Go ahead, Councillor Hughes.
Yeah, just well done, ladies. And thank you, Ardell, for showing up today as well. There's a lot of really strong passion on this committee, and thank you, in spite of not even being on it, coming back and doing this presentation so early in the morning. So it was very well done. Thanks, guys.
Ruby, I was at the curling rink on a couple of days this weekend watching the EACC championship. So some friends. So I thought I might see you or your husband.
Well, we were actually there. We were hiding up in the lounge in the curtained off black curtains in the corner because we actually did the live streaming of.
Yeah, I was just beside you. I heard Jackie Ray's voice. I didn't hear you though.
Yeah, I was doing line scores and giving her scores and things to add to her commentating, but it was a very busy, very long week doing all that, but it was very enjoyable.
Yeah, it is always enjoyable in a curling rink. So if there's nothing else, can I get a recommendation from one of the committee members to move this forward? Go ahead, Councillor Hughes.
Sure. That the Community Living Standing Committee recommend to Council that the Seniors Advisory Committee's 2021 year-end report provided as an attachment to the April 11th, 2022 agenda report titled Seniors Advisory Committee Annual Report be received for information, and that the Community Living Standing Committee recommend to Council that the Seniors Advisory Committee proposed 2022 priorities, seniors online application review, gather seniors feedback on their experiences and the accessibility of city facilities, monitor the impact of COVID-19 on seniors, provide feedback on the companionship and mentoring program, and provide feedback from community experiences be received as information.
Thank you very much. Anything to open?
No, well, actually a little bit. First of all, again, thank you for coming today and giving that summary. But the priorities, there was a lot of discussion about this to make sure that it was within the scope of the committee and still providing valuable input to the council and to the city. So what was brought forward as the priorities, there was a very wholesome discussion to make sure everything aligned and was what we were hoping to achieve. So I'm looking forward to getting that feedback to the city so that if there are areas for improvement, that the city can take action. That's it.
Thank you very much. Anything, Councillor Bermansky? I can't see you on my screen, so.
She says no.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Anything, comments from the room?
Good.
No, we're good. No, then thank you very much. I'll call the question. All in favor? Yes, thank you. And that's unanimous. Thank you very much. Sorry, I'm going to say it's unanimous. The mayor's being difficult in the room. Okay, we're still in. Thank you very much again, Barbara, Ruby. I really appreciate you getting up at this early in the morning on a Monday and presenting to council. I like I said numerous times, it's very much appreciated. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Moving on to the next item on committee. Or on committee business, excuse me. We have 7.4 and it's a request for standing committee motion from the Community Service Advisory Committee and the Environmental Advisory Committee. And this is presented by Anna, but there is a request just due to the sensitivity of some of the program nominees that we move in camera. I don't, for Ann and other members that are going to be outside, I don't think we'll be very long. So please hang in there. But if you so go run out and grab a coffee or whatever, and we'll try and be as expeditious as possible.
Is Anna coming in with us?
Anna is, but
Yeah,
Ann
okay.
Ramsden is
okay.
sitting on there.
Yeah, okay.
All right, can I get a motion to move in? We haven't moved in camera yet. Can I get a motion to move in camera?
Yep. Move in camera, consider nominations to community recognition program in accordance with section 17.1, disclosure harm for the personal privacy, and section 24.1, advice, proposals, recommendations, analysis, or policy options by or for council of the Freedom of Information Protection Privacy Act.
Thank you very much. All in favor?
Come on.
Yes, thank you very much. Thank you.
I'm so excited about my paddle.
I'll take that away from you. Breakout room, you guys. Councilor Mansky, Councilor Hughes, thank you. I don't know, Sheena, you're muted. I'm not sure what's happening. What is happening? Sheena, I can't hear you. I can't hear you.
She's muted. Yeah, she sounds little. Can we hear?
I can't
can she
hear her.
us?
Can she hear us? do the camera. Don't hit me with it. Tell me when we're back live and on the YouTube. We're live on YouTube and we're living. Okay, are we ready to go? Yep. Can I get a motion to reconvene in public? The mayor has put that forward. All in favor? All in favor? Yes, thank you. Unanimous. Thank you very much. Can I get a person to move the recommendation number 2 there, please? Councilor Baransky, go ahead. Or you're muted still, Shelley.
The Community Living Standing Committee recommend to council that the confidential recommendations of the Community Services Advisory Committee and the Environmental Advisory Committee for the 2022 Community Recognition nominees be approved.
Thank you. I don't think we need anything because all our discussions were in camera. Can I get all in favor? That's carried unanimous. Thank you very much. Thank you. And we brought all of our other people back in that are going to be presenting on committee new business. Moving into that right now. And 8.1 is a notice of intention to designate the Lorne and Marguerite Aikens resident at 8 Burnham Avenue as a municipal historical resource. And I have it here that it's presented by Tamsin Brooks, our community cultural coordinator, and Tracy Sui from community services, planner and planning development. I apologize, Tracy. Go ahead if there's a presentation. Who's going to start off? Tamsin?
I'll start off. Yeah, good morning. I'm just going to share my screen here. Okay. Okay, I'm here today to talk about our first request to designate a privately owned property and to request approval from council to start the designation process for 8 Burnham Avenue. Community Services has been working closely with planning and development and the AHF, and I would like to extend a thank you to Tracy Sui from planning and Anne Ramsden from the AHF for their expertise and guidance during this process. They will be available to answer any questions after this presentation. Okay, how do I? There we go. As per the Historical Resources Act, approval from council is needed to serve the homeowner an intention to designate, which in this case is a letter to the homeowner. If council approves, notice is served to the homeowner, and as per the Act, 60 days needs to pass before council can approve the designation bylaw set to come to council in June of 2022. The City of St. Albert supports the designation of historical properties through the Municipal Historic Conservation Program policy created in 2017. The preservation and conservation of historic properties recognizes the cultural heritage of St. Albert, provides community identity, and promotes community pride and cultural tourism. Historic conservation is also mentioned in our new MDP. It is best practices for cities that have heritage policies to cover the cost of designation. Edmonton and Lacombe are 2 examples of cities with heritage policies that cover some costs. Any money associated with this designation will be paid out of the existing Heritage Reserve Fund, which currently sits at about $183,000. Heritage advisory responsibilities were transitioned to the Arts and Heritage Foundation by Council in 2020. Administration received the application from the owner and passed it on to the AHF to review. The AHF advised that the property should be added to the heritage inventory. The next step in the process was to bring in a consultant to write a statement of significance for the property and for the homeowner to apply for designation. The statement of significance lists the character defining elements that make the property unique and worthy of designation. The next few slides will give you a visual of the elements listed above. This property was once a home of Lorne and Marguerite Aikens. Characteristics of the home include a large sheltering roof encompassing a very human scale building mass, roof gable brackets,
It's well done on the inside.
pointed fascia extensions, chimney with battered wall shape, and original wood millwork. The house sits on River Lot 48, facing the Sturgeon River, originally located on what would have been a trail that connected the river lots. This river lot configuration was typical of Francophone and Métis settlements in Canada at that time. That concludes my presentation today. Tracy, Ann, and myself are all available to take questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. In the background here, I'll start off with some questions. In relation to kind of the process around conservation and monitoring agreement and statement of significance, will this always be binding on subsequent owners? And then I think it is, obviously by the nature of the agreement, but what are the consequences or penalties of that? Or is that appealable by a new owner, or is that just the way it is?
I can take a stab at this. The designation bylaw stays with the house. So even if it's sold, the bylaw stays with the property.
Okay, but there's no, maybe, I don't know, Mr. LaFleur, if you're on, or if there's Marta's on, is there, is that like, that's not appealable or anything, any further action by any subsequent owner?
No, there is no appeal, no.
Okay, all right, so once this we designated moving forward, that's going on, that's now a historical property.
That's correct.
Okay, any other questions by members of the committee? Go ahead, Councillor Bermansky.
I just had one question, that if it increases the value to the current owner, when they're selling it, if it does have that designation.
We're not aware of whether or not it increases or decreases the value. This is our first property. We have talked to Edmonton regarding their program, and they don't have solid evidence as to how it may increase or decrease the value of the property.
Yeah. On that point, if I may, though, the Act does not contemplate an increase in value. It does, however, contemplate what would happen if there were a decrease in value, and the city would have to compensate the owner for the difference in value if the value went down as a result of the historical designation.
Yeah, I identified that myself. I have it highlighted here in the sense of how would that be determined, I guess, and is there a limit in relation to what the compensation would be by the city? How is that process done?
Okay, so the only way you would know, through the chair, the only way you would know, of course, is if the owner decided to sell, right? And if they could not get market value, then that would be apparent from the sale price, and the owner would claim the difference in value. And if the city did not agree, if they thought, well, they dumped it, let's say, for a lower price, could have held out for, then the issue gets resolved by the Land and Property Rights Tribunal.
Okay. We do offer conservation grants, but we do have a limit on them of what, 25,000, I think, for the one time only and then up to 7,500 on a annual basis. Have we ever provided those on any other property before, or nothing? Okay.
No, this is our first property.
Thank you.
Can I make the motion?
Yeah. Any other comments, questions? Councillor Killick pointed out that the house was built after I was born. So does that mean I'm historically significant, or? I think you kind of made it mean. It was mean, I think. Mean spirit.
I just was concerned about his decreased value.
Yeah, I don't think I can get compensation for that. Anyways, can I get, if there's no more questions, any questions? Okay, Councillor Hughes, go ahead.
Okay, that just spurred another one.
Yeah.
So what year was the property again?
1937. I was only teasing.
Okay.
I was only teasing.
No, I just want to make sure it was like, okay, so it's like over 80 years old then. It's still, okay.
Yeah.
Okay,
Thanks.
Yeah.
No, I was only being tongue in cheek there. No more
Okay,
questions.
I just want to double check that. You could put in tongue in cheek and then I got to follow up.
Yeah. Councillor Bermansky, sorry.
Just one more question, like a lot of the changes, the deck, for example, and the house looks quite modernized. So I don't know if that would deplete the value from historic as well. So, and sometimes, you know, the owners, if they've put a lot of money into the house already, it may not be reflected in the value. So that would be a concern of mine if they were selling, that the value would be depleted because of the modernized changes.
If I can take a quick stab at that, it's a voluntary designation. So it's the homeowner who was voluntarily wanting to designate her house. We had an architect come in who did a full assessment of the house. And yes, those changes have been noted. If once it's designated, should a future owner or this owner wish to actually take some of those elements back to the original, that's something that could happen.
Thank you for that background. I appreciate that. Any other comments, questions? Mayor Herron wanted to make the recommendation. So
Sure.
Go ahead.
Yep. Do you want them all?
Yes, we need them all.
That the Community Living Standing Committee recommend that council first pass a motion pursuant to section 26 of the Historical Resources Act, affirming that the property at 8 Burnham Avenue, known as the Lorne and Marguerite Aikens residence, is a historic resource, the preservation of which council considers to be in the public interest. And second, pass a motion directing the chief administrative officer to serve upon the registered owner of the property at 8 Burnham Ave a notice of council's intention to consider a bylaw to designate the property as a municipal historic resource, and B, take the necessary steps in compliance with the Historical Resources Act, including preparation of a bylaw for council's consideration designating the property at 8 Burnham Ave as a municipal historic resource. And 3, pass a motion approving transfer of up to $6,000 from the Heritage Reserve Fund to the Culture Administrative account to fund the administrative processes of designating 8 Burnham Avenue as a municipal historic resource.
Thank you very much. I don't think we've need any more questions. Any opening comments?
Yeah, I wanted to put the motion on the floor because I think this is exciting. I honestly find this super exciting. I grew up in Braeside, so I would drive by that house, you know, every day and rode my bike past it, et cetera. It stands out.
Councillor Killick just said you rode your horse, but I think that's mean spirited.
At least I wasn't riding a scooter by it.
Yeah.
It's honestly, it does stand out when you drive past it as something interesting or significant. As I got older, I found out that it was Lorne Aikens School, and of course, I went to Lorne Aikens Junior High. I think this is the purpose of all the legislation, whether it's provincial or municipal, because these things are important to our community, and it's about time we probably started pushing these forward. I'm glad that the homeowner is willing to do this. I would hate to see this building ever torn down, and I'm super supportive of infill, but not on these kind of locations. So we are a society that generally tears things down instead of, much like Europe, when they preserve things. So I'm just really excited that this is happening today, and look forward to the bylaw coming to council and putting a sign up in front of this house one day.
Yeah, no, I agree. Any other comments? Any other member of the committee? Yes, thank you very much for your comments, Mayor Herron. I too am very excited about this, and I hope this actually spurs other interest in other historical designated properties within St. Albert, because I would encourage other residents to take advantage of this program. So call the question. All in favor, moving the motion forward? Thank you. It's unanimous. Thank you, everyone. I appreciate that. Thank you very much. And for showing up today and answering questions. Tracy Thompson, I appreciate all of your work on this file. Thank you very much. We're going to be moving up to 8.2, which is another item on the agenda that I'm always excited about. It's the St. Albert Poet Laureate appointment. This one's presented by Kathleen Bell, our Community Cultural Coordinator, and Jeff Manderscheid from our library. Good morning, and thank you for attending. Who's going to kick it off?
I will start. We have a little PowerPoint presentation, so
great.
We'll just get that up. So This is always the most nerve-wracking part, is sharing the screen.
No, you should be sitting on this side of the table.
Okay, and then.
Move into the
Okay, so
slideshow.
that looks right.
Very well done.
Okay, awesome. So
Started your week off right.
I'm here today with Jeff Manderscheid from the St. Albert Public Library to, I work alongside Jeff to coordinate the Poet Laureate program. And Jeff has joined us to briefly review the Poet Laureate Selection Committee process, as well as report the recommendation of the 2022 Poet Laureate Selection Committee. So in 2022, the selection committee worked under CCAO 24, the St. Albert Poet Laureate policy, in addition to Council Motion CB 22-008, where the task of reviewing applications and recommending a person for appointment by council as Poet Laureate for St. Albert was given to an independent Poet Laureate committee appointed by the CEO of the St. Albert Public Library, and included one person who's also a member of the Arts Development Advisory Committee. Jeff, you're up.
Thanks, and thanks for having us today. In 2022, the St. Albert Public Library was committed to the forming of a selection committee composed of community and cultural professionals for the purpose of recommending a nominee to City Council to name as Poet Laureate. The selection committee consisted of the following members: one Arts Development Advisory Committee member, one member of St. Albert Public Library staff, one representative from the literary community, poets and writers. Members of the selection committee were then determined to have an arm's length relationship with the nominees. Also, the selection committee process was moderated by myself as Poet Laureate Committee Chair. This year, we received 11 nominations.
Wow.
Kathleen, hand it to, yeah, it's great.
Okay. Oh, okay.
Oh, you ruined it. You ruined the surprise.
I ruined the reveal. Okay, but first let's talk criteria. So the nominees were assessed by the selection committee for each of the following criteria: clear and innovative ideas regarding the vision of the position of Poet Laureate, demonstrated ability to engage and inspire the St. Albert community, a body of literary work of superior artistic merit, and ease and skill at presenting and performing work to the public. Additionally, the nominees were required to be current residents in St. Albert or have a significant connection to St. Albert and be 16 years of age or older. Okay, now the most important slide.
Okay, here it is. So after discussion, the selection committee would like to recommend to you Lorne Seal for the role of St. Albert's Poet Laureate 2022 to 2023. The selection committee was grateful to all applicants, but they felt that Lorne's poetry was really engaging, playful, and above all was accessible to the community. They also felt that Lorne's vision for the role was particularly well-rounded, and they were excited about her ideas when it came to getting residents interested in poetry. Lorne's work has appeared in numerous literary magazines, anthologies, and once on a beer can. She mentions the teen and young adult poets of the spoken word youth choir and performs in the adult incarnation of the group. Lorne's maternal grandparents raised her mom and 4 siblings in St. Albert, and she subsequently ended up spending most weekends and vacations visiting aunts, uncles, and cousins in St. Albert, as she puts it, traipsing up and down Parent Street, attending the children's theater shows at the Arden, sledding down 7 hills, and playing grounders at Gish. Lorne loves St. Albert, and she currently works as a librarian at the Jensen Lakes Library. A little bit on her work. Although her published poetry focuses on themes of illness, the body, and womanhood, her performance poetry is much lighter and more playful. In her words, she's written and performed poems about water slides, trees, political satire, pancake ice, how nature imitates art, and a ridiculous number of dog poems. So Kathleen, over to you.
So as such, the Poet Laureate Selection Committee recommends that Lorne Seal be named St. Albert's Poet Laureate for the 2-year term commencing April 2022 and ending April 2024. Are there any questions?
Congratulations. Yeah, no, congratulations. Thank you very much for the presentation. Any questions of staff? I appreciate that. Just for the recommended motion, can we add that the Community Living Standing Committee recommend to council that Lorne Seal? I think we just need to follow the proper format there. That the Community Living Standing Committee recommend to council that Lorne Seal. We got double. Okay. Okay, this is Monday morning, really, isn't it? Recommend to council that Lorne. This is exciting. I'm just making sure that we follow the proper protocol. I know the mayor's always mentioned on many occasions that we don't utilize our poet laureate enough. So I think that's going to change this year. I really want to keep our poet laureate very active. We have many events in our community where I think that her skill will be of benefit to the event and not only and to our community. So can I get somebody to make that recommendation? Oh, wait, Councillor Killick wants to talk.
Yeah. Will we be able to have her nominated within the National Poetry Month in April with the timing of getting this to council as a recommendation and then approving it?
Yes, so it is on, I believe, on the agenda for council next week.
Okay, good. Perfect, thank you.
Yeah, and she will be. I think, will she be presenting a poem? Okay, great, perfect. And we all like dogs on our, so I'm looking forward to dogs. Anyways, can I have somebody make that recommendation? I need somebody. Councillor Hughes, go ahead.
I need you to put it up on the screen though for me. Hold on.
Yeah. It's coming up. I'm sure it is.
I'll go back and scroll through to find it.
No, it should be there. No, it's coming. There it is, right there.
Okay, awesome. The Community Living Standing Committee recommend to council that Lorne Seal be named St. Albert's Poet Laureate for a 2-year term commencing April 2022 and ending April 2024.
Great, thank you very much. We've all in favor of that. And that's unanimous. So that's fantastic. Thank you, Kathleen and Jeff, for all your work. And please thank all the committee members with you and when you see them. We very much appreciate it. All right, and Danielle just popped up onto our screen. Can we take 5 minutes just quickly, if you don't mind, Danielle and Amanda? We're going to take 5 minutes and we'll be right back. So be back here by before 9:10. See if we have everybody here. Councillor Bermansky, Councillor Hughes, thank you very much. Danielle, Amanda, and we are joined, I see, by Councillor Jolly. Welcome, thank you very much. All right, I've got 8.3, which is our Parks Bylaw and liquor consumption in St. Albert Parks. And Danielle, are you doing the presentation or is Amanda?
I'm going to lead in and Amanda will take over.
Okay, go ahead.
Hey, good morning to you all. I'm Danielle Podlevny. I'm here with Amanda Wild this morning on behalf of the Recreation and Parks Department to present to you a draft Parks Bylaw. But I say on behalf of Recreation and Parks, but this really has been a cross-departmentally collaborative project that has been in progress for over the last year and a half. So we're very excited to bring this item to Community Living Standing Committee today. And with that, I'll turn the presentation over to Ms. Wild.
Thanks, Amanda. It says our bandwidth is a little low in here, so we just have the one screen going. So
we're good.
The air conditioning unit in our server room on this floor is down.
Okay.
So we're happy to.
Okay, great. Okay, Amanda, we're ready to go. Go ahead, you can share your, I think if you're going.
I hope you aren't sweating too bad or anything up there in this lovely spring morning. And I agree with Kathleen. This is the hardest part, is getting the share screen to work properly. So just give me one moment, please. 2.5 years in and we think we'd be good at this, but I'm still terrible.
No, you did very well there. It's up and running, so.
Thank you. All right, so we'd like to start off just, of course, by thanking you for allowing us to present to you on the Parks Bylaw Review Project. Of course, my name is Amanda Wild. I'm the Interim Manager for Recreation Facility Development and Partnerships. I'm really pleased to be joined today by members of our project team, including Melissa Logan, Aaron Picard, Garnet Melnick, Anna Royer, and Wade Benfield, who are available to answer any questions you may have after the presentation. I would also just like to take this quick opportunity to thank the many, many, many staff who have supported and helped shape the proposal in front of you today. So we're here today to walk you through why you are seeing a revised Parks Bylaw, the process undertaken to date, the areas of focus for the project team, and what we heard during our public engagement process. Then we'd like to specifically talk with you and hear your perspective on the alcohol consumption in designated park spaces pilot program, and finally review the next steps for the bylaw. So review of the Parks Bylaw is really overdue, and yet it's still really timely. It is one of the oldest bylaws on the books without significant revision in many, many years. I will say it is a testament to our residents' general respect and care for our parks and open spaces, as well as the excellent work of our municipal enforcement and public operations staff, that there have been very, very few issues within our park system over these years. However, the city is growing and there is a need to keep our bylaws relevant, responsive to current use, and provide effective enforcement tools to support responsible use of the parks and open space system. With the creation of several key new policies and updates to related bylaws, especially our new municipal development plan, Flourish, it is time to bring the Parks Bylaw up to date. So just a little bit of a reminder of kind of the background or purpose behind the Parks Bylaw. The Parks Bylaw is really intended to manage public behavior in parks so that people feel safe, comfortable, and welcome in our public spaces. This includes the actions of individuals, groups, businesses, and other organizations. The proposed bylaw provides clarity to certain groups of users, including event holders and businesses, while remaining flexible to adapt to new trends, changing user demographics, and emerging needs. The new bylaw shared with you represents the results of cross-jurisdictional research, internal issue scanning, a review of related other City of St. Albert bylaws, legal review, and the results of public engagement. While we are maintaining the spirit of the original bylaw, due to the age of the previous bylaw and the number of changes proposed, administration is recommending approval of this as a new bylaw and to rescind the previous Parks Bylaw. As a bit of an overview, we've been working on this for just about 3 years now. Project was first initiated in 2019 and moved through several steps. The first public engagement phase was entered in early 2020, focused on issues that had been identified during the initial review. It was quickly stopped by COVID-19, with only the Youth Advisory Committee and Environmental Advisory Committee being consulted at that time. The project was restarted in mid-2021 with both the new council policy on encroachment and the alcohol in parks pilot that had occurred in the interim, informing the work of drafting the new bylaw. Public engagement was initiated in November 2021 and completed in mid-December 2021. So just a little bit of the steps that we went through. It's been a long journey, but worth it. So as shown on the screen, the city used a multitude of methods and reached a large audience through targeted posting online and use of the Gazette. Despite the extensive reach of the outreach and advertisement, a very small number of residents actively engaged in the process. Bylaws can be particularly difficult for residents to see themselves affected by, and while more conversations with the public were hoped for, the extent of the audience reached suggests that residents were aware of the opportunity to provide feedback and that they actively chose not to engage. On this process, the project team decided to proceed with the process. So as you can see on the screen and from our recent community satisfaction survey, we had excellent outreach. That 24,000 Facebook post reach is not an error. We don't know if those reaches were residents or just nearby. Facebook doesn't provide that type of granularity, but we do know that there was a very large number of residents that were reached through our engagement. So moving on now to the Parks Bylaw and what we are proposing and what we heard. The first kind of bucket of work or area of focus was the scope of the Parks Bylaw, which we have changed slightly. While this has no practical effect on the actual land base that the Parks Bylaw is applied to, it does bring the definition more consistent with existing other bylaws, the use of uses more formal designations, and gives more flexibility for questionable areas. So some good examples of those areas that are a bit gray are like the green field outside of Service Place doesn't meet our previous definition of park. The plaza in behind St. Albert Place is another area that by its land use bylaw zoning wouldn't be a park, but may be considered under this bylaw. And what it really does is allow us to more clearly identify which are park spaces for the purposes of enforcement under this bylaw. So it doesn't alter the land use bylaw or anything like that. It just says these are spaces to which the Parks Bylaw applies.
Amanda,
yes.
Sorry to interrupt, but boulevards within that sentence is confusing to me. It removes boulevards in parks as in scope. I feel like double negative. Could you explain that?
Apologies for the lack of clarity on the slide, Councillor Killick. In the previous Parks Bylaw, the existing Parks Bylaw, the Parks Bylaw specifically calls out boulevards within parks as in scope of the Parks Bylaw, which is a little bit odd from an enforcement perspective because boulevards are generally covered under the traffic bylaw. So it didn't make a lot of sense to have those boulevards treated specifically differently than the rest of the boulevards in the city. So we've just removed that very kind of odd provision out of the proposed definition.
Do we actually have boulevards in any parks? Like it's kind of removing something that doesn't exist. Is that correct?
There are roadways. I'm using roadways in a very loose term, access roads primarily within parks or areas in between parking lots and the actual park space where some people may consider that a bylaw or a boulevard. But generally speaking, no. So it was confusing and a little bit, we felt it was unnecessary and didn't add clarity to the scope of the bylaw. So that's why we're recommending removing it as well.
Okay, thank you.
Correct me, go ahead, Sheena, I see you raised your hand.
Yeah, okay, so adds conservation reserve to parks as a potential future tool. So I guess I'm completely lost when I see that. Because I'm like, so aren't the parks currently designated as a park, which would be conservation de facto? So how would that be different?
Yeah, thank you for the question. So conservation reserve, and sorry, that should be capitalized to make it a little bit clearer, is a relatively new tool under the Municipal Government Act. It allows municipalities to purchase and designate land for conservation purposes as a separate designation, so separate from municipal reserve and separate from environmental reserve. We don't currently have any in the city of St. Albert, but other policies like the Green Environment Strategy are contemplating adding that tool into our toolbox. It does require cities to pay for the land, which is why we don't have any currently. But by adding it within the Parks scope of the Parks Bylaw proactively. It means that when people enter in these spaces, if we do receive conservation reserve or purchase conservation reserve in the future, it allows us to treat these spaces as parks, even though they have a slightly different potentially have a slightly different designation than most of our parks and open space system.
The other question I have is the other lands is designated as CAO. Why would this not come to as a council decision if you're going to be making land use bylaw changes where you're now putting things into a park? I would assume that would be a council decision. Why are we letting the CAO make that decision?
Yeah, it's certainly a question, and we've looked at it several different ways. There are the intent of designating something a park under the Parks Bylaw is to establish the way that we'd like people to behave. So as I mentioned, it doesn't actually change the designation of that space to park as under the land use bylaw, park with a capital P. It just allows our enforcement officials to treat those spaces that are kind of park-esque, but may need another designation under the land use bylaw from a public behavior perspective. So the examples I brought up, the green space outside of Service Place, the promenade in behind St. Albert Place, those are both institutional in our land use bylaw, and we're not seeking to change that piece, but we do want people to behave as if they're in a park. In those spaces, potentially. And again, those are just examples of spaces that could. If it were council's wish, we could change that provision in the bylaw to something a little bit more generic, or as spaces designated by council. This just gives us flexibility to kind of deal with those really small one-offs without affecting any land use bylaw designations or any other designations that may exist on the land. And maybe I'll ask David if he wants to add any clarity to that.
No, I could only muddy the waters. That was an excellent.
I just personally, I still have a difficult time with that, the justification for it. Council has to do sometimes minutiae details about roads and designations and changes, and that all happens in a uniform fashion on an annual basis if we see it. So designating everything over to one person constantly is it's dangerous. That's it.
Amanda, could you give a specific example where you would believe that other lands as designated by CAO would benefit? I mean, other than the one that you identified, I would that help?
Yeah, certainly. Another area, and again, I would say these are hypothetical examples. We have not, this is a tool for future proofing us against some of these decisions or some of these lands that may come up or things that may come up where public behavior is maybe not as ideal as we'd like and we need additional tools, or there's an inconsistency. And I can say that on top of the explanation I've given, one of the interesting things that came up is for the alcohol in parks pilot, there was some suggestion that perhaps that space right directly in behind St. Albert Place, adjacent to the river, should be an area where alcohol consumption would be allowed. But the reading of the provincial legislation says it has to be within a park, but that land is actually institutional in our land use bylaw. So we couldn't actually add that site. Another area that of gray is the Arts and Heritage Foundation lands. Depending on which way you read various documents, it's part of Red Willow Park, is considered a park in terms of public behavior, but is not designated that way under the land use bylaw, nor should it be. So that's another good example of where we may want to talk with the Arts and Heritage Foundation and see, would this help management of their site, or would this be too restrictive for them? So there's quite a few little bits and pieces that have come up through the review process that we thought having a tool to move that to a parks kind of designation, again, strictly under the Parks Bylaw for the purposes of enforcement, would be helpful.
So it wouldn't be major amendments or major changes to the Parks Bylaw. It would be more around just implementation or kind of operational issues, such as the small little area outside of St. Albert Place is a perfect example. I think you wouldn't want to necessarily bring that one back to council. You would just be much easier just to designate that to the CAO. But if you were looking at a major change that would still come to council, is that still the proposed process?
Yeah, absolutely. So we wouldn't be looking to change major spaces to a park under this bylaw without significant discussions with council. I can't think of an instance where a space would be major enough to need a bylaw provision as well as council redesignation. Normally our parks and open spaces come to us through districting appropriately. So it would, I'm sorry, I can't think of an example of where we'd take a major space that wasn't park and try and designate it as park under this bylaw.
Yeah, I just see it more as as you've identified in one of the bullet, just a little bit more flexibility around certain specific rules or guidelines that would be in place, that rather than take it up through to council, you would just give it that designation to the CAO. So, okay, Councillor Bermansky, I saw you had your hand up.
Okay, I've listened to this bylaw. I appreciate all the effort. You know, it's been a long time coming and, 3 years in the works, but I've listened to this presentation probably about 5 or 6 times at different public engagement and stuff. And it has been mentioned on numerous occasions, the CAO designation. So I echo what Councillor Hughes is saying. We can sit here and say, well, we wouldn't use that in this term, but we need the words correct in the bylaw, not just saying we wouldn't use it or we don't think we'd use it kind of thing. And then the other question I had is, there's very few problems, in your research ever, come across in the Parks bylaw as it exists. And I mean, I know we need to evolve, but why do we keep using the control public behavior if we don't have those problems? And a lot of the public feedback also mentioned, excess in bylaws added. And so I'm not sure if it's, as presented, there's a lot of glitches in it still as I see it.
I think we still got a little bit more to go through. So maybe let's have the rest of the presentation and then we can go through it. And those concerns will come out and be noted. And but I believe that part of it is just to modernize it, and without reading too much, some of that might be necessary in changes to the MGA that's appeared since 1965. So, but anyways, let's just, maybe if you can hold off, let's let Manda finish her presentation, and then maybe there might be more background to some of those concerns. And if not, we can still address them at the end.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much. And thank you for the questions, Councillor Bermansky. We'll get back to those at the end. As you can see on the screen, kind of what we heard was broad support for the changes, again, with a fairly limited scope of public engagement in terms of responses. And there were a couple of questions, and I will say that those questions came from, I think, a grand total of 2 individuals around the appropriate delegation of authority to the CAO, but we did note those and really consider that as we went through the bylaw. So the next area of work that we looked at is that activities in parks. So this section has a number of changes, moving from what is a very narrow, limited scope to a larger and more flexible scope. And I think to Councillor Bermansky's point, one important thing to note is, although this looks like a lot more regulation, what we've really done is clarified rules that exist in other bylaws. So a lot of the things that you're seeing on here in the new bylaw were under the traffic bylaw or protection of persons and property bylaw. So that's where the enforcement was coming from. So it's not so much an addition of regulations perhaps, but really moving things to where it makes more sense and where the public is more readily able to understand where that applies. In this section, what we heard, again, some concerns about the appropriate delegation of authority to the CAO via website posting. Our surveys did support that provision, with 59% of respondents supporting it. Again, a very limited number. We did ask the public where they felt more restrictions were needed or less. 52% felt more restrictions were needed. However, from that data, there were no trends or consensus on specific additional restrictions. We had suggestions ranging from prohibitions on fireworks, drones, motorsports, golf, archery, e-bikes, e-scooters, BMX tracks, firearms, noise. Most of the suggestions that we received through our survey were already in the draft Parks bylaw or restricted by other bylaws. We did also hear some significant public support for enhanced enforcement of the bylaw. Sorry, it wouldn't change on me. So events is kind of another area of focus for us. Events that do not obstruct traffic or require exceptions to existing city bylaws within parks are unregulated currently, which is certainly an oddity among the comparable bylaws that we reviewed. In fact, we were the only Parks bylaw or parks related bylaw that didn't speak to events within about 13 different municipalities that we looked at. Introduction of a new definition for events and a more defined process are required, and that will help us implement the bylaw if approved. This work is already underway as part of our new event strategy being led by our Recreation and Parks staff. Through the engagement process, we heard strong support for the proposed changes to the bylaw, with 81% of people supporting a new definition for what events actually are. 88% supporting a new process for applying for and receiving permissions for events. There were definitely concerns about not adding too much red tape for existing or minor events, so things like block parties and family reunions. So that's something we'll very carefully consider if the bylaw is approved. And then some comments around considerations for events, avoiding political rallies or protests, not permitting trail closures or avoiding them where possible, enabling businesses to operate during events without extra permissions being required, and then having additional policing requirements paid for by events holders. So again, these are suggestions provided by the public in very low numbers, but we did think they were worthy of sharing with you today. So the next area of focus for our review is businesses. Like events, businesses in parks were among the areas of not directly regulated. Again, we were on oddity in our cross-jurisdictional scan that we did not directly regulate where you can have businesses in parks. And really what's that left with that lack of clear policy and without a bylaw, the city has been inconsistent in its approval of business in parks, and we don't have a consistent approval process to enable commercial vendors to operate in parks. Administration views enabling businesses that are compatible with the general intent of the park, that do not detract from the public enjoyment of or use of the parks as a positive step in activating our parks. In putting this provision in, this process would capture businesses that need to take up space within a park for a business purpose, but would not require permits for those businesses using the parks as intended. So things like boot camps that are, happy to move if public needs to use, say, the soccer field, as well as like dog walking businesses and those that are just using the parks as they're intended to be used. Adding a requirement for permission in parks would necessitate a new process to be implemented, which would consider the public feedback received during our public engagement. Through this engagement, including a target meeting with the Chamber of Commerce, we heard general support for a new approval process, with our survey showing 63% of respondents in favor. Again, those general concerns about avoiding excess red tape. We really want to enable businesses, so the Chamber was supportive of the provision, but really didn't want to see the process become cumbersome or difficult for businesses to work within. Again, some of those comments around making sure that business and event permissions are not required for event-based opportunities. And then we asked respondents really what things are important for implementation, knowing that we've been inconsistent in how businesses are allowed to operate in parks. Residents really favored us really considering heavily how many vendors are permitted at one site at one time, with 84% of respondents supporting provisions around that in our process. Looking at how many days or which days of the week operation is permitted, considering limitations on hours of operation. And then the kind of another key one for the public was considering how much space is required for the business operation, with 81% of respondents saying we should really put some limitations on that. The next area of focus for us was
hang on, Amanda, for a second. I know you're moving into a different area, but I wasn't sure whether I saw Councillor Hughes's hand come up. Was it specific to that previous slide, Councillor Hughes?
It was slide 10, actually.
Yeah, the one. Yeah.
Hey, thanks, Councillor Marguerite. So the question I had was definition of events. Like, I go back and look at the definition. A gathering of people commencing at a predetermined date and time, having one or more of the following features, like that could be a birthday party. Like you could, this is broad enough that you could technically say that anybody who gathered needs to have permission. Like you could make people's lives hell if you decided you didn't like them. So how is that? I'm having a difficult time with this event thing, because it doesn't, obviously if you have a larger event that has, food trucks and other things like that, but there could also be small events by this definition. There isn't even a minimum number.
Yeah, thank you for the question. And I will invite any of my project team members who want to add any granularity to my response to please pipe up. We've spent a lot of time talking about this definition. The problem with a minimum is sometimes you catch people that you don't want to. So a good example is a large sports team going out and celebrating in a park after, you know, I'm going to call it a playoff win because we'll be optimistic. And so the idea here is, on top of having a predetermined date and time, they need to be requiring to kind of take over a space. So precluding public use of a space or excluding others. So if you're going to come in and, you know, kind of glom onto the picnic area at Lions and nobody else is going to be able to use it, then that would be considered exclusive use, and we'd ask that you come in and get a permission for that. If you're going to be setting up structures, so large tents, signage, anything like that, food trucks taking up space in the parking lot, those kind of things, or if you need alcohol service, because we definitely need to know about that, as well as anything that requires relaxation of other bylaws. So that could be traffic impediments, that could be relaxations of noise bylaws, those kind of things. So it is predetermined set date of time, and you're basically requiring exclusive use of a space that would normally be available to the general public. So that's kind of, it does leave a lot of subjectivity. And we did look at minimum numbers, and they range in our region anywhere from 25 to 100. But I will say that our project team looked at it over and over again, and that minimum number is very arbitrary. There are those events that can be small and quite impactful to the park space, be they, you know, generating a lot of garbage, taking up a lot of space, and there can be very large events that have almost no impact to the public use of the space or to our operations. So we really were looking at it from that lens of, are they impacting the public? Are they going to need extra services? Are we going to have to go in after them and clean up the mess or empty the garbages more frequently? So when do we need to know that this group is kind of descending on the park space? And that's kind of the philosophy. I'm not saying that it's the right one, but it is something that administration is recommending based on all of our conversations and research that we did. Maybe I'll ask Danielle if she wants to add anything to that.
I think that's a really great summary, Amanda. So, I mean, to that point, it was just looking at what those impactful pieces were and impactful components of an event. And we pulled some of those pieces also to the event policy in knowing that those other components like liquor service or exemptions to bylaws typically are, but it's really that exclusivity of space. If you're going to come in as a general park user, to your point, Councillor Hughes, to have, you know, a family gathering, a small family picnic, you're not going to prohibit access to the park from other users. It would be if you're looking for an exclusivity use of Lions Park to run a marathon, very different kind of ask of the city and ask of the park space to the detriment of possibly other users in that space at that time.
Okay, so in this, you mentioned about the political rallies, or if, you know, somebody wanted to meet for political purposes, that could, by this definition, fall into requirements. So I guess, let's say that somebody did a political rally that the municipal government didn't agree with their position. Are they going to then say you can't have it? Because right now I see this as an option that the city can actually control whether or not people have a voice.
Yeah, to respond, Councillor Hughes, there is, as I mentioned, an updated event strategy that has to go along with it. We only share that some public were uncomfortable with different types of events. For your information, it is not something that administration is considering in terms of what that event strategy will look like and how that event permission process will work. It was just something brought up by the public. So the strategy, my apologies, will be clear and provide that granularity that the bylaw can't.
So will it protect people from being able to meet even if the city doesn't agree with what they're meeting about?
Councillor Hughes, if I may jump in, there's something called the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. You have the right to freedom of expression. The city could never lawfully silence anyone from exercising freedom of speech. It's not a concern, I think, that you need to be worried about for that reason. There's a higher law that would stop the city from muzzling people in that way.
Okay. I'm not going to comment further on that.
All right, thank you. Question. Councillor Killick has a question just based on some of the discussion.
Yeah. This is maybe just for clarification, Amanda, but I often see weddings out by the Trestle Bridge. Great to see them, love to see them. Do they require pre-approval and booking? Like they're through the city currently, and would that still be allowed and maintained? And I often see people with, you know, the bottle of champagne after vows. So just for my own information, could you just clarify how that works now and is still maintained, I think, in the bylaw?
Absolutely. So currently, because we don't have any bylaw around events, we tell people weddings are a perfect example of where we're like, yeah, should we know that they're having a wedding in the park as a city or as an administration? Probably. They are not currently required to get permission. What we tell people seeking to have weddings is don't interfere with the public's use of the space. You may be asked to move. You can't preclude anyone from using that space, but go ahead and do what you like within the parameters of the existing bylaws, of course, where that champagne would definitely not be permitted. You know, there are certain amounts of things that aren't worthy of MES attention, perhaps, but certainly not something we would encourage, and not technically legal currently within our current bylaw and provincial legislation framework. So those were kind of the events where we're like, hey, it would be really nice to know that they're there, to give them that space and say, hey, maybe the public can't go walking through your wedding ceremony. Not that the public's not respectful, but you're also kind of limiting how the public is able to use that space on a spontaneous use basis, or it's not intended for events, it's being used for a special purpose, for a limited time at a set time. So we'd actually ask them to come to the city, and that allows us to go and, hey, clean up that garbage if you're going to have 50 or 100 people that might be creating a bit of a mess, and allowing us to just be proactive. Our permits do not cost anything currently. And it is a relatively, I would say, easy process, and we're not looking to add a lot of complexity to these really simple events. With our event strategy, I believe the current thought is to create different streams for how much complexity there is to an event on what permission is required. You know, it might be simple, a one-page form and an email back saying, yep, you're good to go, to something more complex with more rules in place. If you've got food trucks and, you know, loudspeakers and all kinds of, you're taking over a space for 2 days kind of thing. So I think that's kind of where we're leaning, is taking some of these simple events, making sure that we know about them, so that we can, you know, make sure that the space is in good shape for the public and for the event. And then add some complexity to the more complex events.
So how that's great. I mean, it sounds like we're trying to enable that and make it easy. How do we ensure that we don't have 2 wedding parties show up at the same time to the same
That's what we need.
space?
Yeah, that's one of the problems right now, is we can't, and we don't. So you could have, I laughed a little bit. We walked onto Kingsmead Park for our opening, and we had to interrupt a birthday party because we didn't know they wanted to use the picnic shelter, and we had obviously had our event, and felt really terrible actually about it. So we currently don't have any ability to really manage quantity of events, or, you know, if people are showing up spontaneously for large groups, we can't warn anyone, hey, there's also a wedding going on that day. I will say that hasn't, and Danielle can correct me, but that hasn't been an issue. But again, we're looking to grow another 30,000 people. So this is really looking more towards the future. We don't have a lot of problems with events right now, but we can certainly see as we grow and densify, especially with those high use sites like Lions, where something like this will really help us future proof how people are using our park spaces.
Yeah, I certainly wouldn't want to restrict them. I want to encourage them, but especially getting outdoors, and so as long as that's being thought about, then that's great.
Go ahead, Danielle.
Councillor Killick, I would just add to what Ms. Wild said, that you know, we have a number of events that come through, different size and magnitude to the many events that come through our park spaces. With the smaller events, definitely right now we talk about the non-exclusivity, so that could be something that a wedding arrives and another wedding is on site the same day. It would be our intent to really look at the level of rigor required for all those different processes, and where that makes sense and where that level of rigor doesn't make sense, where we need a little bit more simplistic process. But to that point, just to try to find a bit more cohesive process for our event management.
Okay, thank you. Go ahead, Amanda. Thank you for the interruptions.
I will try and remember where I was. Apologies if I stumbled a little.
There, yeah, you were right there.
So the next bucket of work that we looked at was encroachment. So this provision of the Parks Bylaw is intended to add enforceability to the new council policy on encroachments that was improved in 2021. While this provision is intended to be used only as a last resort, when resolution through the process outlined under the council policy cannot be achieved. So it's just really important to understand that this was kind of the hammer piece of the council policy, and we'll always direct people to go through the council policy process first. I will say there are two elements to this provision. The first makes encroachments a finable offense, and the second allows the city to remove encroachment and recover costs for the removal, which is consistent to an existing provision that already exists under obstructions found in the traffic bylaw. So it does make it a little bit clearer. It does add an enforcement penalty, but it is really not a new provision. It exists under the traffic bylaw, so this just makes it more relevant to the park spaces. We did not ask the general public what they thought of this, as it's kind of one of those already not a lot permitted under bylaw, but not super clear to the public. But we did talk about it in our in-person sessions and heard broad support from the public.
Mayor Herron has a question.
Did I miss it? Are we keeping in the traffic bylaw so this encroachment will be in two different bylaws?
To Mayor Herron, yes. The scope of the Parks Bylaw includes parks, open space or environmental reserve, stormwater management facilities, that kind of thing, PULs that are used for recreation, so the PULs with walkways and things. But it doesn't capture the roadway encroachments and things like that, so it will live under two places, the traffic bylaw under obstructions and as a separate provision under the Parks Bylaw. What we understand from our engineering group is the parks encroachments are where they have the most difficulty addressing. They tend to get better compliance on the roadway right-of-way encroachments and the utility right-of-way encroachments than on the Parks Bylaw. So that's part of the reason we're proposing it as a very clear section in the Parks Bylaw.
Is it similar penalties in both bylaws?
It is, yeah.
Okay, cool. And last question, where's that picture taken?
I cannot remember.
It's beautiful.
It is in St. Albert, but I cannot remember where.
Well, if anybody knows, let me.
That's in Braeside, so it's going across the ravine, kind of halfway down the ravine, and then there's a steep hill kind of right on the other side. It's a pain to bike.
It's beautiful, though. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Jolie. So environmental protection is our next area of work. The current Parks Bylaw does not speak directly to environmental protection, and enforcement of environmental protection is currently covered for the Parks and Open Space system under a mosaic of federal, provincial, and other city bylaw provisions, which, you know, is a little bit confusing for the public. It's confusing for staff sometimes. As we know, the city's parks and open spaces are highly valued by residents, administration, and city council. We wanted to make a clear statement that environmental protection is of a high importance, provide clear direction where the public needs to seek city permission before making changes to the city's park system. We also wanted to emphasize the value and importance of our trees, but note that tree loss fines are intended to be a deterrent and do not reflect the lost value or replacement costs of lost trees. Through our public engagement, we heard broad support for the proposed changes, with high support during discussions with the various groups, including the Environmental Advisory Committee. We heard support for the various support for the new provisions between 58%, which would ban the use of insecticides, herbicides, and pesticides on public spaces without public city permission, and 81% support banning the alteration of parks and open spaces without city permission. We also heard some suggestions to increase fines for certain offenses for things such as pesticide use. Particularly, we heard that from our two council committees. As well as suggestions to increase the fine for tree loss from the proposed $500 to $750 or even $1,000.
And I've got two more hands. Sorry, I'm basically allowing questions based on the slide you're on rather than going back and forth. So go ahead, Councillor Jolly, and then we're good.
And if I can ask Melissa and Aaron maybe to pop up.
Yeah, I'm glad Louise and Aaron are on the call because my question has to do with trees. So when Louise gave us an urban forest tour a few years ago, she did comment on the fact that people remove trees, especially like right behind their houses and things like that. What is the actual cost of those types of removals, because I'm looking at this fine and I'm not convinced that that's sufficient to cover that cost.
Louise or Aaron, did you want to reply? Sorry, I can't see them.
I can take that. So depending on the type of tree that gets removed, the value can be quite variable. I mean, if it's a young tree, but it's a good rule of thumb is it's $1,000 for a young tree to be supply installed and maintained for 2 years to establish. That's $1,000, which is why a suggested fine of $1,000 is strictly replacement of a young tree. When you get older trees, you're now talking structural value. You're putting value on the services that tree actually provided in the landscape, and can easily exceed, tens of thousands of dollars. So this, like Amanda said, this is a deterrent. We'll never get the value of that tree actually back, but we can use a potential fine revenue to hopefully start replacing some trees where they have been removed.
Okay, so just, based on that.
Can I add a little bit? Sorry, Councillor Jolie.
Yeah.
Just that this provision does not preclude the city's current process of being able to go after people civilly for the loss. So this is specifically the fine amount.
Yeah, I suspect that we wouldn't. Mr. LaFleur doesn't want to do that.
He likes trees.
So I would just throw this out to the committee that I'd be totally supportive of bumping that up to $1,000, because that really is our bare minimum cost. So I'd be supportive of that.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Hughes, you have your hand up.
Yeah, so this is kind of news to me about the tree loss. So are we talking about, so we're in a park and people are just chopping down trees? Like this is just kind of, you're nodding, like this is common or not uncommon? To, like, they want firewood or something and they chop, I don't know why anybody's chopping down a tree.
Yeah, absolutely, Councillor Hughes, and it's a great question. We don't have statistics on this. We do know it happens for any number of reasons. We came across 2 instances in the last 2 years where residents were removing trees for bike skills areas. So making their own use, and they needed to get a tree out of the way because it made a better pathway or a better jump or what have you. Residents do it to improve their views if they think the boughs are, overreaching into their yards. It's really within our parks and open space, it's largely neighboring landowners, but there's lots of different instances that we've run into even in the last couple of years where this is happening. We don't know who's doing it, but it's pretty clear that it's happening with some regularity in our parks and open space system. Aaron or Louise, did you want to add to that?
The only thing I would add is that it's more common in the more natural area forest, like the ravine areas. It's not so much like a big tree out in the middle of a turf area. So it's more in the more hidden away, I guess, out of sight, out of mind is the attitude that some people may take towards it.
As a follow-up question, this relates to the encroachment. So because you mentioned that if people have the boughs going over their property, they just address the problem themselves. So if the trees do encroach on somebody's property, do they have the ability to ask the city to remove the tree or to prune it back so that they don't have that issue?
Yes, that's the bulk of our CSRs related to that are coming in, so that we will go out, our customer service requests, we will go out with our tree crews and do that work. Some people don't mind it and never call us, but the ones that do, we certainly do. We are trying to, and in any of our new developments, try and maintain a bit more of a buffer between back fence lines and our property, so that there's a reduction in the number of times that actually happens. But as you know, if you travel through any of the older neighborhoods, quite a few of those natural areas are quite close up to the fence lines of residents.
Okay, this isn't directly related, but since we're on the topic, let's say you have a neighbor who plants their tree right next to your fence and then it grows over, whose responsibility is it? Like, can you ask them to prune it back because it's now gone over your property line? Or do you just basically have to live with it because they planted it a foot away from your property line?
I can take that, guys. So when you start dealing with neighbor to neighbor, every property owner has the right to their property as it exists from the property line to the sky. but trees also have the right to exist, and it's an acceptance that a tree cannot be necessarily maintained within a property line, but that tree can also not cause damage. So if a neighbor has planted a tree right next to their fence, and this tree now starts interfering with your use of your property, the canopy is a different issue, and the roots are potentially a different issue. But the tree is allowed to be a tree, but the tree can never become a hazard to you, and the owner of that tree is responsible for that tree. But you start getting into neighbor to neighbor in conflicts. Those neighbors have to work it out between themselves. From a city perspective, we take no role in that. This is neighbor to neighbor. So if a homeowner's tree damages their neighbor, it falls under their homeowner's insurance policy likely, and they will deal with it from that respect. There's a mediator that we do use, that we put homeowners in touch with, that can try and mediate the conversation between the two neighbors, because maybe it's a financial issue or something like that they can address. And so they try and help that way. But the tree is allowed to exist. A neighbor cannot willfully kill a neighbor's tree, or they can be held liable for the value of that tree, not just replacement cost, but the actual value, which again could be in thousands of dollars. So it's now the neighbors need to talk. You also need to plan where you're planting your trees. If the tree is just absolutely in the wrong spot and is causing a hazardous situation to a neighbor, then likely it should probably be removed.
Okay.
Thanks. We got a little off. At least we got to hear the tree whisperer. So thank you. Thank you very much. Let's keep moving. I'm just cognizant of the time.
Thank you, Councillor Mackay. And just so the last piece that we looked at was enforcement. So this is really just about bringing this into modern language. So updating enforcement related language, looking to move from a defined fine structure. So the current Parks Bylaw, any offense is $100. It doesn't matter what offense it is, major, minor, impactful to the park space or not, it's $100. So we did want to move to a fine structure that looks at the risk to the park space, the risk to the public. We did look to our city bylaws. For example, it was cheaper to litter in a park than it was on a roadway. So bringing those in line. And then, so moving to that graduated fine structure. And then we did just hear a little bit of comments for the need for increased enforcement of this bylaw through the public engagement, but got very little feedback, which is kind of expected for this type of provision. All right, we're going to move into something much more interesting, particularly on a very, very cold spring day, alcohol in parks. So as a reminder, the Alcohol in Parks pilot was implemented September 1st of 2021 and ran until the end of October. As a critical component, signage was installed at each site as required by the provincial legislation. Additionally, we added signs to each picnic table, directing participants to fill out a survey via a QR code. Social media posts were also used to advise residents of the pilot, and the Gazette did write an article advising residents of the pilot as well. So just a little bit of a reminder of what we did last year. Looking to our neighbors, several other municipalities initiated pilots related to alcohol consumption in parks in 2021. No municipalities have introduced a permanent service level related to alcohol in parks, though only Edmonton has formally approached their council to make a decision. We're also aware that Okotoks is considering either a pilot or a bylaw this year. From our conversations with our municipal partners, both Morinville and Strathcona County noted very limited update to their pilots and little to no public complaints. Calgary had significantly more response to their public surveys than St. Albert experienced, but they had public generally supporting continuation of their alcohol in parks program and in fact looked to expand it in 2022. Edmonton had a much more mixed feedback from their public with much more enforcement issues and public concerns around this pilot. Edmonton staff noted that their public communications was not clear in the beginning and caused a significant amount of confusion for their residents. Additionally, Edmonton chose to only permit alcohol in River Valley parks where they have a dedicated enforcement staff that patrols regularly, which probably contributed to a higher amount of enforcement actions than we saw in other municipalities that had similar pilots. So just a little bit of a overview of kind of what our partners are up to. So as part of the motion that was put forward by council in 2021, we did complete public engagement. As noted on the slide, our public participation response rates through both the pilot survey and the Parks Bylaw survey were very low. Only one complaint was made to public operations related to a large quantity of bottles that were left behind at Lions Park, and there were no municipal enforcement complaints received during the pilot. We did not receive any feedback during the Parks Bylaw survey that would suggest that residents were unaware of the public. People who responded to the Parks Bylaw survey seemed to be quite aware of the pilot that was run. So the detailed results for what engagement received showed a clear, but definitely not overwhelming preference to permanently allow alcohol consumption in St. Albert parks, with 64% of total responses supporting a permanent program and 52% of respondents favoring alcohol consumption in all St. Albert parks. Those opposed to the idea focused on walkability of parks and needing to drive to a lot of our larger citywide parks, and the related risk of drinking and driving, ensuring that parks feel open, welcoming, and accessible for all with that family feel that St. Albert residents value in their park system. Other areas of concern raised included why alcohol was being considered, but cannabis use remained prohibited, and the necessity of a program for parks at all.
I just think it's the smoke.
Yeah. And the last comment was really related to, is this program even necessary? Our parks are well loved, well used, so it seemed like an unnecessary addition to our park system. Should a permanent program be implemented, respondents provided a number of considerations to administration when looking at potential sites, including washroom access, provision of recycling, proximity of permitted consumption areas to child-focused amenities, and keeping alcohol out of school sites and not permitted everywhere in a park site. From what information was gathered, including discussions between virtual engagement participants, it is clear that this topic is polarized with clear positions, even when discussing pros and cons. Survey results were either wholly in support of a permanent program, neutral, or completely opposed. There was not a lot of middle ground that we received. The input we received through both processes is far too limited to suggest what is the preference of the community at large. The lack of engagement in this topic could have many drivers, anywhere from disinterest to engagement to fatigue to lack of the importance of the topic due to COVID-related stressors for residents. Based on what we did here, it is hard to predict if a longer engagement period or different timing would have changed the results. However, preferences around alcohol use are largely values-driven, and although we can seek to understand those values through engagement, we are unlikely to receive a clear consensus from the public at large related to alcohol in parks. So I'll go to the recommendations just because these talk a lot about alcohol in parks. Administration is recommending that the bylaw be passed as presented. As there was some controversy on the issue of alcohol consumption in parks specifically, we also provided some alternatives in your agenda package for consideration. The recommended bylaw includes a general statement that alcohol consumption in parks is permitted, with further limits and direction as per the CAO, so very similar to how the pilot program was operated. The first option would essentially extend the alcohol in designated park spaces pilot program into 2022 with additional public engagement. The bylaw would be silent on this issue, and administration would return with additional reporting and recommendations for council in late 2022 or early 2023. It is worth noting that administration is unsure whether additional public engagement will yield any new or any clearer information than what you've been provided today. The second alternative would cease any alcohol consumption in parks, however, retain all other aspects of the proposed bylaw. The third option would see CLSC not recommend the proposed bylaw to council. Administration could cease work on this project and review again in 4 years' time, as directed by council policy. We are also happy, of course, to take any other direction as council wills, in addition to the options shared today. And I can't see anyone's face. Is there any questions on the alcohol?
Yeah, Councillor Bermansky has a question. Before you, Shelley, just a second. In relation to, I know the next slide down is the implementation and ongoing. So from a procedural standpoint, right now we have the bylaw that's a recommendation to move the bylaw to council. And then we have this 3 alternatives as proposed by administration. In relation to getting feedback, do we need additional feedback? And maybe that's what Councilor Mansky is looking at. Like, let's say we had, for example, we had the discussion around maybe clarifying what administration is recommending around the CAO. From a procedural standpoint, when can we have that coming back to committee, or do you really want to move this forward to council, and then we would have that discussion at council? And I'm just trying to seek a better way. So what was administration's kind of understanding in relation to moving forward from the information provided to committee today?
Yeah, thank you for the question. So our recommendation is obviously to take the Parks Bylaw as is and recommend to council for all 3 readings. And I will ask David also to step in on the procedure, please. My understanding is that we could take direction today, amend the bylaw to bring forward to council for first reading. Based on what we hear today, with debate, obviously. But David, did you want to jump in?
Actually, Marta is stepping in. David had to get his wooden teeth fixed. Go ahead.
Actually, Amanda, you've got it right on the nose. So yes, preferably, I think this gets moved along. So if there are directions about changes to be made, then we would incorporate those into the recommendation from the committee to council, and bring it to council with the recommended changes. However, if more time is needed, or perhaps there's a request for more information, then we could do an IR and provide that information, delay things, or bring it back to this committee is also an option.
Yeah, thanks, Marta. I appreciate the additional information. I mean, I'm just going off of some of the comments in relation to questions, and one was the CAO clarification, and the other one was around penalties, particularly around removal of trees. So the penalty section is usually, something we do at a different point. So I mean, that's kind of the comments that I had right now. So I'm not 100% sure, but let's go to Councilor Bermansky right now. What was your question, Councilor?
It's more of a statement that because of the questions that have come from council today, this bylaw isn't even clear to council when we're having to define so many factors of it. So if it's not clear to council as existing, it's not going to be clear to the public. And we have the important things in place anyhow, like there already are, other means of affecting encroachments and tree cuttings. There's bylaws and fines for littering. There's, nothing is urgent in this group of items right now. So I believe that, we need to have more information as alternative 3.
All right. Councilor Hughes, any comment to that?
Yeah, well, I mean, the concerns I have after having Ann's questions answered, still the concerns remain. So the amount of power that one individual has remains a concern. I don't have a problem increasing the tree loss fines, but we rarely probably not even know who we're going to be fining. So I mean, there are still some concerns in here that I feel uncomfortable about approving, quite frankly. And I personally, if we're going to do anything, I would want alternative 1. Our pilot for the liquor has basically been almost non-existent, and public feedback has also been too low. So for us to say that we're comfortable moving forward on this full steam ahead, I think would be irresponsible. There's nothing wrong with having the pilot continue and getting more feedback before we start saying, go for it. 36 responses and over a 2-month period. While we were going through lockdowns, it just seems strange to say that's enough that we can go forward with this and make it a permanent situation.
Yeah, that it does concern me. I see you, Councilor Joly. I'll just want to make a comment on that. I mean, there's no doubt that administration has done a lot of work and gone through a lot of detail and made all sorts of attempts to engage community. I mean, I even leaned over to Councilor Killick and I said, our parks and our trees and our outdoor is what we would get the most feedback on. So I don't know what to take away from the fact that we were unable to get as much feedback as I thought we should on something as important as this one. So it just really, it was quite odd to me. And I'm not saying it was because of administration's lack of trying. Don't take that from what my comments are. I just found that really challenging. Councilor Joly.
Yeah, thank you. I think this update is excellent, and I really appreciate the clarification that administration's given today. So I recognize I don't sit on this committee, but certainly when this comes to council, I'm comfortable passing it, with the exception of I'd like to see that fine for cutting down trees to be higher. I really like that suggestion for the public. In terms of the liquor in parks, I think the interest in feedback was so low, because really, we live in a community where when I take my kids trick-or-treating, I get offered shots of Baileys in my coffee. Any
drinking in the parks anyway.
Yeah, if you go to any evening event in St. Albert, people just put, they put a shot of Baileys in their hot chocolate, or people are like, this is something that's already happening in our community. It's not causing an issue for the people who are being responsible, which would fit under this bylaw. And the people who are drinking irresponsible, it would be illegal no matter whether we change the bylaw or not. So people who are littering or behaving badly or whatnot, there's no change to that process. So I just really like to thank administration for their work, and this looks great.
I appreciate the comments. Councillor Killick, do you want to add any comments?
Yeah, I'd just like to ask, even potentially, what would be the alternative to giving the CAO the authority in the different sections that we've outlined? Like, I don't know who else would have that authority. We don't want council approving parties in the park or running around and fining people for cutting down trees. So who else would have that authority, or how else would it be managed?
Yeah, thank you for the question, and I'll ask Marta or David to jump in as well. The intention was saying the CAO, I believe, and I'm sorry, I don't know if it's council policy or a bylaw, the CAO can further delegate. So where it says CAO, it can almost be read as administration as delegated by the CAO, or read as delegated. So certain decisions through administrative processes would stay, requiring a sign off by the CAO. I can see those spaces as designated as park under the bylaw. Really, that's something you'd want the CAO to sign off on at minimum. Where some of the other pieces where it says CAO, we would establish directives that would delegate that authority. So it's not physically the CAO, but it's the CAO being aware of
where to designate.
Yeah, exactly. So that's the intention here, is to really not bring things forward to council that are almost operational or kind of lower level in nature, but giving the CAO the authority to still create those enforceable rules to enforce appropriate public behavior in our parks without having to elevate everything to the level of council. Marta, did you want to add anything to that?
Correct. I was just going to say operational matters should really remain with administration, but Amanda got it, so I don't even have to say it, but I did.
Thank you, Marta.
Yeah, thanks for that clarification. I certainly envision that would have been the answer, and not wanting to get involved in administration or even administrivia at some of the finer levels of things we've talked about today. So, and I certainly agree with alcohol in the park. It's almost like we don't even need it. People are going to do it. They've probably been doing it for many, many, many years, and I've never seen problems or really even heard of problems. So it's probably a low enough level item that we could move forward with it as is. And as Councillor Mackay said, I'm amazed that we had 24,000 views on our website, but only 46 people participate in the surveys. That's maybe says that again that this is a non-issue for most residents. So based on that, I think we could move forward with it.
Thank you, Councillor Killick. So I'm just looking in relation to the next steps implementation. So I'm assuming that's obviously if this goes to council and council approves the Parks Bylaw, that's what that speaks to then, I'm assuming, right?
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Mackay. We did want to point out this slide, not to presuppose decisions of council, But to recognize to some of the concerns raised today that there is a level of granularity that is not within the bylaw, and that was quite intentional. Not wanting to create cumbersome rules in a bylaw that then require these extensive processes to update or change. So we do recognize there's quite a bit of detail that is still needed. So we've identified for you some of the things that would be done or already in progress just as part of day-to-day administration. So things like updating our processes for permissions for businesses, events, and drones, identification of any of those site-specific rules delegated to the CAO as per section 3.9, any of our web page updates, lease updates, signage and infrastructure updates as required. So really the point of this slide was really to share that we are aware that there is a level of granularity that is not present in the bylaw and that we are cognizant of and working through those pieces of kind of new rules to get that level of granularity so that the public is super clear and has really good information on how to move forward.
Yeah, I appreciate that because I think that speaks to some of the kind of the concerns that were identified in previous questions. I think you're right. We're at a high level in relation to the Parks Bylaw. It's almost like doing regulations in a statutory kind of legislation that comes from the province, right? It's always the devil's in the details, and we don't have the details in front of us entirely, but we do have a overarching Parks Bylaw, and that's what's in front of us. So I'm actually going to see if anybody wants to move the original recommendation, and Mayor Herron has her hand up. So go ahead.
Yeah, I've been listening to the comments and stuff, and we're at committee, and I was concerned about putting the motion as is on the floor and having it a tie vote and it fail. It goes to council anyway, and you pull it and approve it at council. Hearing two members of council that aren't on our committee show support, I think I'll just actually move exactly as recommended to push it forward to council, because I was thinking about bringing it back to committee, but I don't think any more information is required, and I don't want any changes. So I'm going to move it as is. That the Community Living Standing Committee recommend to council that the proposed Parks Bylaw 07/2022 be enacted. So speaking to this, I think this is years in the making. It's funny that we have so few residents engaged in, and I think that's because people are happy with the way parks are in the city, and they just want it to be solidified in a clear and comprehensible bylaw, which is what's in front of us. It's very permissive, allows our staff to do things quickly and nimbly. No more red tape, if that's a phrase we want to use at the municipal level. But and I honestly think that the change with liquor in the parks is almost irrelevant or insubstantial. It's something that provincial legislation allows, that other municipalities are doing as well as us. And as we've talked about, it's happening already, and this actually just allows for enforcement. So yeah, I'm actually super pleased with everything that's in front of us, and that's all I have to say.
All right. Any other comments from committee members? Councillor Hughes?
Thanks. So obviously I was expecting council to approve this, but I won't be approving this today because I just do not see the problem with extending the pilot. You look at the risk reward, and what's the risk of extending the pilot? You could still have liquor in the parks, but we could gather more feedback before making it permanent. And so there's really nothing that's problem with extending the pilot, but there is potentially high risk with simply allowing this to be a blanket statement and saying, well, people are already doing it, so therefore we're going to allow it. Because we're only allowing it, we're basically also de facto encouraging it. When we're saying it outright that that's absolutely going to be allowed in this situation, then it becomes a situation of how much has this person consumed? And is it to excess? And how do we define that? And so basically we're living a very long rope here to allow this to come forward. And I read the comments. There was a lot of people that had serious concerns about this program. In spite of that, which did not make any sense, we had 52% people saying go for it, while there was more than half the people that have serious concerns about the program. So that was a huge disconnect. As far as saying we've had enough reach, these were Facebook ads. I have no idea about how effective those ads were. If we measured them and did a targeted campaign to make sure that we were actually getting the effectiveness, what was said in the Facebook ad, how many were duplicates of the same individual that got the same ads, whether or not the 24,000 of that, how many were actually Sonoma residents. We actually don't know. We just know that 24,000 impressions were done in Facebook ads. That's it. So how well it was targeted, we don't know. What we do know is with 46 people or 36 people responded. So, I mean, maybe the ads just were not very well done. But that's just seriously the concern. But the risk reward of actually saying, let's just go for it after a 2-month pilot with virtually no feedback, it doesn't make any sense to me. So to me, having an extension of the pilot, getting better feedback from the public and making sure that we are really making sure that we're doing a risk reward analysis to cover any issues that may arise would be a far smarter strategy than what we're currently doing, which is saying nobody seems to care, so let's go for it. Without actually, they didn't come to the city website and 24,000 people chose not to do it. They had a Facebook ad impression. It's not difficult to get a Facebook ad impression. So I would personally prefer to get a much higher number of people, whether we go to the parks and do pop-up requests or something like that to actually get people's feedback. But putting a survey on where people were allowed to drink and asking them what they think of it, it's kind of a self-serving response for the most part. And so we really did not do a thorough investigation about public support on this. And we've also had a very limited time for this pilot to even occur. So with that, I mean, I would personally only do alternative number 1. I don't see the risk in actually extending the pilot at all. That's it.
All right. Thank you, Councillor Hughes. Anything, Councillor Bramansky?
No, I'm just standing by alternative 3. I just find that there's so many holes in this. I just can't come to grips with everything that's missing. So.
Thank you. I'm going to weigh in. I mean, I understand your argument, Councillor Hughes, and I think obviously when this will come to council no matter what the decision of committee today is, and I think that also goes. I believe administration has heard the questions and the responses, and again, the granularity in a bylaw like as big as this one, I mean, we could certainly go through in incredible detail on every item, but I think a lot of that is around operations, and I believe that is entirely with administration. We do, as councillors, give our direction around around what would be kind of the main themes that we're looking for in our parks and how we would like them to operate. However, I just don't know how we could possibly go through every portion of a bylaw like this, and so there has to be some requirement of trust in relation to moving on in relation to operationalizing it. There, I said that word. Actually, yeah. I said that word. Anyways, but I do understand some of the reluctance around alternative that is presented in alternative 1, and but I'm going to recommend, or my position right now for today will be this, that we move it forward. We can get more detail and information when it actually does come to council, and then who knows, maybe alternative 1 is the one that we move forward to on that point. But anyways, I'm going to call the question. So all in favor of the original, I think, and 2, we've got 2. All opposed? We have 2. So the recommendation fails. So thank you. It's not anticipated, but we'll probably see this come back in some form. This is one of the challenges I have with the committee structure in this thing. So, I mean, right now we're going to leave it as is, and there'll be some more discussion with administration. And but right now the recommendation is that it fails. So we're going to move forward to our last item on the agenda is 8.4.
Councilor Mackay, what direction are we giving to administration to improve it to to bring it back, just so we're.
So it doesn't,
we're
right,
clear.
right now, it'll go to, all the recommendations are on the agenda for the next council meeting. And at that point in time, it can be brought forward by any member of council. And then it can be discussed and more direction can be provided to administration at that particular time. If we would have had a motion on the floor in relation to bringing it back to committee, then we could have actually then provided the administration with what we wanted to have come back.
Yeah.
But because we went on the original recommendation, that's where it's at right now. It has to go to council. Is that correct? I'm looking at Marta.
Yes.
Still within that framework, which I agree. Are we asking that to help council make a final decision when it comes back, that administration should bring any additional information, or?
That can be, I believe, and correct me if I'm wrong, Marta, this could be an IR, information request, in relation to having that information to administration, so that actually there could be some an IR.
On what? Like what?
In relation to, so Councillor Killick would like some additional information on.
Okay.
Well, I'm not looking for additional information. I just wonder if, because otherwise we're going to come to council and have the same discussion. But so is there something specific that was missing in this presentation that could be added to our council discussion that would help move the decision forward? Or are we just going to have it as is?
Well,
yeah, go ahead.
I would say if a member of council wants more information, they need to let staff know. I'm satisfied with what I have. So, but so if Councillor Hughes or Councillor Romansky want more, they need to submit that before it comes to council.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. And so this will come back on. It'll be in front of council at our next council meeting.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Thanks, Marta. I appreciate that. Moving forward to 8.4, Sturgeon River Valley and Natural Areas Protection Bylaw, presented by Adrian Slop. Go ahead, Adrian.
Thank you, Council. So I don't have a formal presentation, but I'll just walk through kind of the report and recommendations quickly. So in February of 2018, Council approved a motion for staff to evaluate opportunities or merits for a separate bylaw to protect the Sturgeon River Valley natural areas and parklands. And at the time, administration had noted that there was an intent to address those questions as much as possible through the forthcoming municipal development plan. Following the completion of the MDP and in response to the motion, administration has since reviewed River Valley and natural area protections within a number of communities, including Edmonton, Calgary, Red Deer, Lethbridge, Medicine Hat, Cochrane, Canmore, and High River, just to kind of try to identify best practices or where there might be policy gaps. Of these, Lethbridge and Edmonton have more robust area redevelopment plans developed to address issues such as land use and open space protection within the river valleys. And then particularly with both of these, geotechnical issues were a major component due to slope stability, et cetera, and then flooding issues, of course, and also park development. The other communities, almost all of them used a mix of policy with between their own municipal development plans and often a park and open space plan that talked specifically how to utilize those open spaces, and then land use bylaw protections of their floodplains. As I noted, I don't think there didn't appear to be any sort of single best approach. The area redevelopment plans in Lethbridge and Edmonton are definitely, very specific and robust. They're also dealing with river valleys that are, substantially larger than in St. Albert. And, specifically the bluff heights and stuff like that are substantially more so than the Sturgeon River, Riverbank heights. We evaluated our own river valley in concert with our area structure plans that are in place. So Braeside, I read that wrong. outside of our area structure plan. So Mission, Braeside, Riel Industrial Park, to see just the extent of development in those areas, and then what entitlements were in place through area structure plans or area redevelopment plans. So downtown area redevelopment plan, Oakmont, Woodlands, and Riverside, and then looked at public ownership patterns and plans for the Red Willow Trail system, as well as the municipal development plan policy. And while it is indubitable that the river valley and natural areas are important to the citizens of this city, based on our review, as noted, administration feels at this time that the new MDP policy, land use bylaw protections within the floodplain, and the existing parks master plans provide protections that will enable those important features of the city to remain in place. And I've just highlighted a few of the MDP policies in particular within the report. A couple of the more significant ones. 5.19 is, lost my note. 5.19 was to encourage separation. Let's see. Require development and construction areas that are but natural features to be separated by physical barriers during construction, protect through erosion control measures, etc. 5.1.10 is to assess and potentially require restoration work to take place if grading or construction activity affects natural features. 5.1.1 requires satisfactory and environmental studies to be included in statutory and non-statutory plan proposals that may affect or impact natural areas, ecological system, or lands unsuitable for development. And 5.1.12 identify relevant environmental studies as part of the statutory plan and development application submission requirements. And 5.1.13 require appropriate setbacks from identified natural features and lands based on based on them being considered unsuitable for development. So again, upon the review, administration feels that the development of a separate bylaw probably isn't necessary. I did provide the recommendation that council rescind the motion, but if council does have specific areas that they would like us to dig into, there is an option that council provide more specific recommendations or asks as to opportunities for enhanced protections. And I just wanted to note, we are doing the land use bylaw review and mature redevelopment neighborhoods strategy this year. So those may also offer opportunities for further investigation if council so directs. And that's about it.
Thanks, Adrian. I appreciate it. Any questions, comments, concerns? Go ahead, Councillor Hughes.
Yeah, thanks. Hi, Adrian. So you said Edmonton has a more robust, I realize that they have a larger landmass, but they also have a more robust situation than what we do. So I guess I understand what's in the MDP, but it's, I mean, saying like require appropriate setbacks does not give both the developers nor the residents an idea of exactly what that means. So what is the problem with doing a bylaw that would be to the same level of protection that Edmonton has put in?
I think, Councillor Hughes, like I noted, the intent was to try to address a lot of these concerns, or to make, I guess, to make people understand that the natural environment is a key component of the city, and we do want to make sure that if development proceeds, that there are adequate measures taken in place. The MDP provides flexibility, which I can see what you're saying. You know, it doesn't provide a specific upfront about the exact build to line or something like that. It requires somebody to prove where their build to line could be based on slope stability, soils, geotech, floodplain, all that kind of a thing. So I think ours was, the flourish was intended to provide a little bit of flexibility for somebody to prove where they could or could not build, versus like Edmonton in particular, and I think Lethbridge also, they have a very specific established top of bank line that they did for the whole valley with some studies. And I think part of this component too is a majority of the land that we're talking about is already either developed or public. So there just aren't, unless you start to talk about major redevelopment, purchase of, a number of consolidation of a number of single family properties, particularly around the Sturgeon River Valley, there just aren't a lot of opportunities to actually do more, I want to say do more damage than what's already been done through the, the development of the city. That corridor is almost entirely developed. When we look at going out to the Carrot Creek system, we already intend to have 50-meter setbacks or floodplain, depending on the, just kind of depending on the conditions and the slope of the soils and stuff like that out there. So we already kind of have provisions in place. So again, we didn't feel like it was necessary to have that level of specificity, because again, we've provided for protection measures, and then it's up to administration to ensure that those are met.
Okay. I guess how much work is it though to look at what Edmonton did? And I understand that we've already had a lot of development occur. We still have some areas, however, which haven't been, including with the annexation that's occurring. I understand we have the setbacks coming forward, but it's also about making a statement about our value for this corridor, not just saying it's hidden within an MDP. And also just giving a clear definition for, even for redevelopment. If they have that private property and they want to choose to redevelop it at some point, as you said, they could purchase multiple single families and make it into something different. How much work is it? Because I look at this is 4 years old. And other than me bringing it up multiple times, and then now we're digging it up and saying, I don't want to do it now, or we don't want to go forward with it now, there hasn't been a lot of work on this. So what is the challenge with really following what Edmonton did and really defining this area and recognizing its value?
So I guess I'll just touch on a couple of things. The discussion at the time in February was, as I had noted it, just going back and reviewing the actual discussion, was to come back with options about what other communities have done and are there efforts worthwhile for doing these additional kind of protection efforts. And as we noted at the time, administration intended to do a lot of this through the MDP. So the MDP was completed last year. Yes, we probably should have brought it up last year. We didn't, and I apologize for that. But so there was always this component that we were intending to cover a lot of this through the MDP itself. To go back and do a specific, I guess it would depend, Councillor Hughes, because if we're talking about an area redevelopment plan, it's not quite the extent of an MDP, but you're probably talking about 1.5 years of planning, I would think, for a full area redevelopment plan with substantial engagement. And again, that goes to the point of the municipal development plan, was to really capture a lot of opinions and thoughts across all spectrums, and then incorporate them in. Now, if you're talking about just trying to establish like maybe a technical build to line or something like that, that's a little bit different. That's probably just some technical study work and then trying to fold that into the land use bylaw or something along those lines. And we did say within the MDP, so we did identify some opportunities to establish appropriate buffer zones or setbacks. So that is stuff that it was identified as future work to be done. So I guess the answer is, with all planning things, it depends. But if you're talking about a full ARP, it's probably 1.5 years of work and substantial dollars and substantial engagement. If you're talking about more specifics around top of bank or build to or setback kind of things, then it's probably some technical work and a lesser amount of consulting dollars and just some project management and things of that nature.
So I'll just end it with this, Adrian. It was the second one I think that we were looking at. It was just for clarity for both residents and anybody who wanted to develop, really where the boundaries would be, so that we like this initiated when we had the development on Sturgeon Road, I believe.
That's right.
And there was questions about, should they be allowed to go to that level or should they not? And had there been something that was very clear, then it wouldn't be up for a debate and misinterpretation from different parties. So that's really what it was, is when I look at, or I think about at least Edmonton's bylaw, it does give defined boundaries as to what cannot be developed under any circumstances and what can. And we don't have that. Appropriate can be defined differently by different people, right? Like how long a minute is depends on what side of the bathroom door you're on. So it really depends on whether or not you own the property versus you don't own the property, what you think is an appropriate setback. So I was looking for just a bit more of clarity on that, not necessarily a very large task, but rather a defined clarity on where we're protecting and where we're not. So hopefully that helps you regardless of how this motion goes up. I think that, as you said, you're going to follow up either way with other things. I think that's what the public and developers deserve to know before they start moving forward on anything.
Sure. Yeah. So that's again 5.1.8 of the MBP is to establish appropriate buffer zones, setbacks, and other mitigation and design measures when enabling public access to environmental reserve, et cetera. So.
Thank you.
Question.
Councillor Killick has a question.
So first off, I'd just like to say, I think everybody on council has wanted to make it very clear about protecting the Sturgeon River and as a key asset for our city and our residents. The question, Adrian, is it clear that the 50-meter setback from top of bank has a absolute definition or strong line? Like if I was to look at a geotechnical map, would everybody agree clearly what the definition of top of bank is? Or is that a ambiguous term that if you ask 3 engineering firms, they would give you 3 different numbers or lines on a map?
Maybe I'll try to take a crack at this, and then I don't know if Christina wants to jump in here, but I would just say the top of bank should be like a generally a line that can be established and by any consultant. They could say this is top of bank, and then we review and agree or disagree on that. So ultimately it's the city's opportunity to I guess consent to that established top of bank line. We had that experience with the Riverbank Landing, where they're proposing to do some of their development. They had to establish where they could and could not build. It's established by qualified surveyors. So again, it's not like I don't think it's a subjective thing where people are going to fudge it and pretty soon you're going to find a development 5 feet off of the riverbank down in the floodplain. For one, it can't happen because of the floodplain restrictions, but it does get established through technical requirements or standards, I'd say.
I'll just say I completely agree with Adrian. We are asking as planners, we are not geotechnical engineers, so we are looking to the geotechnical industry to provide us with some of that information. So we use those plans to help determine what that top of bank is. And sometimes the top of bank is, we can collect it as environmental reserve up to there. Other times what we're trying to decide and to determine is a developability line, and where these things basically become, where the land becomes developable. And once it becomes developable, that's where all of a sudden as a private landowner, you can start developing. If it's deemed undevelopable, then that's where we can collect that for the most part as environmental reserve, as long as it meets the criteria of the MGA.
And just to follow up on that, Councillor Killick, so that 50 meters is a minimum to be established. So it doesn't mean you can go within 50 meters if you find some other sort of rationale. You still have your 50 meters from top of bank. You have to, apply your riparian setback model or the slope stability analysis as part of that work. So again, we do think that there are generally protections in place for the river valley, but I understand if there's not a bolded line on a map throughout the city, that maybe that's where there's some cause for concern.
The second one is the term we use in the briefing document on 513. It says encourage and support protection, encourage and support natural open areas. Collectively, do we believe the word encourage is strong enough to really protect the river, as opposed to, I don't know what other word is stronger than encourage, but ensure, I guess, was the word that was debated during Flourish.
Sure. I mean, yeah, you could have that discussion. I think, like I've said, between the floodplain and public ownership and what's already been developed, it's already done. Most of it is already, it's already been significantly impacted. So now you're talking about nuance of maybe a few potential infill properties that we don't have on the radar yet. I just, between all of those area structure plans and everything that's been built from border to border, from Big Lake down to the east end of the city, the Sturgeon Valley is already impacted substantially. So based on our review, we don't anticipate more impact. So you're talking about ways to enhance the environment, enhance public access to the environment. Those are things that are in the MDP. That's stuff that you see in the Red Willow Trail Master Plan. But yeah, I mean, the city built up around the valley already. It's not like we have a lot of unfettered, pristine, out of floodplain natural areas adjacent to the river that are potential development pieces. It's primarily been built.
Yeah, fair enough, Adrian. And sorry to cut you off, Christina. I just think, I give an example of if one of our big box mechanical stores, not to name a store, but Canadian Tire was to relocate, would this give sufficient protection to the river? Like, I'm not familiar where Canadian Tire protections would be, but if that was to be redeveloped, would the current rules that we've just talked about give sufficient protection to the river? I can't think of anywhere else, to your point about how it's already developed, but that one comes to mind.
So I would say that yes, it does. So you would start at a minimum with the floodplain, and then you'd move out from there to prove these what's suitable for development with these other studies that we administration is able to require of developers. So I would say that it is protected.
And I'm just going to agree with that. And it's not just about, so, a question about ensure or encourage was utilized. It's also remembering it's not always about a full redevelopment of a site where you're looking at, say, a Botanica style development. You're also talking about development in the river valley that might include a walking trail, a picnic area. Like, these are all different levels of development. Development is any change of the landscape. So I think there's quite a few people who would say, oh, it's not a big deal to put in a picnic ground or maybe even a parking lot, but they might have difference of opinions when it comes to, say, redevelopment of, say, the mall site along the Sturgeon River. So it would depend on the scale of impact, which is why we did not put down require or ensure and use the word encourage.
Okay, thank you.
That's good. Yeah, actually, you know what? Those are good comments. And actually my comments around that was some of the language in the MDP is around those encouraging, but you know what, Christina, I appreciate the extra clarity because I never thought of that actually. Because I was thinking that we needed maybe stronger language and that could be provided in a bylaw that's not there. But I also have to raise the fact, and I think Adrian, you talked on this, and it's also that we still got the land use bylaw review and the mature neighborhoods redevelopment strategy that that's obviously going to be, like you've identified, it flows down from the MDP and it's going to add a little bit more granularity. Councillor Jolly, go ahead.
Thank you. Just a really quick question. So I support the recommendation, and my only question is that right now I'm getting feedback from residents about, I think Edmonton is debating something to do with boulevards and a few other different things. And I've been directing people to the public engagement for the land use bylaw that I believe is coming up this fall. Is that my best bet for those kind of comments?
I mean, I guess it depends on what they're related to. If nothing else, it gets them on our radar and we can dig into it. If we're getting a preponderance of comments about something that we can affect through the land use bylaw, then for sure we will consider it. And if it maybe doesn't fit in the land use bylaw, but it's an engineering standard or, you know, some public work operation, then we can capture those and move them to the appropriate location as well.
Great. Thank you so much.
All right, nothing else. I will, Mayor Herron wants to put the recommendation on the floor.
Sure. Community Living Standing Committee recommend to council that council motion 17-120 that read administration develop recommendations for a bylaw that protects the river valley area, natural areas and parklands be rescinded.
Go ahead.
Yeah, thanks. Speaking of this, I totally support this because of what has been said today during questions, that concerns have been addressed through the MDP and eventually the land use bylaw. And the line in the gender report that got me in line or to support this was on page 2 of 5 that said, about halfway down, it says the intent was to eliminate the need for a standalone river valley bylaw, which would likely be redundant in many areas and time and resource intensive. So it's exactly the thing we don't want, is redundancy and asking our staff to do work that is unnecessary and with staff capacities as is. I'm not saying that I don't want to stop considering how we develop and how we treat the Sturgeon River. It was actually part of my campaign platform to try to talk about guiding development on the river, but that was more about utilizing the river, having development face the river, having enjoyment, platforms, et cetera, along the river. This, what I think the original intent of this motion has been addressed. So I will be supporting the rescinding of this bylaw, or this motion, sorry.
Go ahead, Councillor Hughes.
Thank you. I still think that there's a need to put this in. We've said that there's going to be further work being done to better define what some of these other types of setbacks happen. And we can say there's no problem until another redevelopment comes forward. And then we're going to have all this discussion about whether or not they can do what they do. And one of the things is not just can you build a large building, but just as was said by staff, what development mean could be as much as a picnic table. So it also tells you how far are we developing what into where. So we could say that a certain level we're allowing this level of development, and at a different level there's a different level of development. So what said is that needs to still be done could still be done and be put into a document for clarity. And that's basically, it would just be a continuation of what's already on the work agenda, but then being put in so that it has absolute clarity for everybody involved, especially those who are not involved in government, who want to know when something's happening is impacting them, what the actual impacts are. There is no deadline on this motion. something I think I regretted at the time now, but nonetheless, there still is no deadline on this motion. So after these other things have been done and brought into clarity, this could come into play, so that there isn't like it has to be done in the next 12 months. It could be after we finish all of this, this is what we have as a succinct document. And it doesn't have to be 150 pages. It could be as short as 2, just to give some kind of clarity as to where we're allowing what to happen on this resource. There has been work done on the MDP, but there's also for the definitions that could happen that would allow people to have a bit more clarity. So, I mean, it's saying we're close to being there, so we don't need to get all the way, I think isn't necessary. I mean, we could actually say, let's get all the way there and then come out and see what happens with it. So, and as I said, there's no deadline on this. So it could be done in 2 years' time, as long as we're not actually moving towards it and giving succinct of this is what we've come to determine. So I still think that there is a value in having that done. And if Edmonton recognizes the value of their river valley and putting something in place like that, I think that we should be doing the same. That's it.
Thank you. Councilor Bermansky, any comments? No, thanks. Good points by administration and by yourself, Councilor Hughes. I appreciate this. I mean, it's clear and it's obvious that our residents value our river valley and our natural areas. We just had that conversation with our Parks Bylaw. And I mean, I recognize everything that's in the MDP, and I recognize all of the policies and all of the statements in relation to it. And it's a very complete statutory plan that should provide and guide new development. And you build that in conjunction with some of the other current other reviews, the land use bylaw review in the mature neighborhoods. But I don't see the harm of leaving it as is and asking administration. I mean, we could bring this back in 18 months or 24 months. I don't see the harm with just leaving the motion. There is no time frame on it. And and I can sense that even, and as you said, administration's identified that, most of our current river valley is protected already because development's already occurred. But I just think there might be an opportunity that we just didn't think about yet, that we could actually capture. Adrian, I think we're in debate now. I don't know. Did you need some clarification specifically to something? I mean, it's usually a little unusual for administration to.
No, I apologize. You're right. No, I was just going to suggest that we come back after LUB and infill. But
yeah. No, and I appreciate that. I just get the sense that I don't see it's just basically sitting as a placeholder on there. And I believe that it might also give us an opportunity in case we just didn't think of something that's potentially there. So I'm actually not going to support the recommendation. I think I don't see the harm of it. And the River Valley and our natural areas are so important to our residents that this is something that I believe that we can just potentially maybe even come to the rescue if we need it to. So anyways, call the question. All in favor? I have one person, and all opposed? I have 3. The recommendation fails. So thank you very much, Adrian. I appreciate, and Christina, I appreciate the information, and I appreciate the indulgence and the like. So thank you very much. And that's all I have. I have adjournment, and we've got committee of the whole in approximately 32 minutes. So I'll see everybody else then at that particular time, and I can gladly relinquish the chair. So all